So we welcome everyone for today's discussion, the continuation of third canto. And today we'll be continuing with our discussion on the sixth chapter of third canto. Yesterday, while we were speaking on this chapter, right at the beginning, I was making a point. In this chapter, particularly, the creation aspect has been described, which would be further elaborated in details in the fifth canto. What we see here is kind of sarga. What happened, particularly here in this chapter, what happened after elements were created. And along with them, sense devtas. Their prayers we discussed in the previous chapter, and the Lord in this chapter begins to answer to that prayer. He began to expand himself. So while discussing this chapter, we are talking about there are two ways to understand the creation of the universe. And both are very exclusive. Viewpoint, you have to reject the other. You cannot say 50-50. एक पैर यहाँ, दूसरा पैर वहाँ. ऐसा नहीं चलेगा. So if you accept Vedic perspective, then there is no space to expect the space to accept the atheistic point of view. Yes, something can be accepted as long as it is in line with what the Vedic scripture says. Just like according to theory of relativity or some different theories, according to them or according to the theories, the universe is always expanding. So we accept that because that is also the Vedic perspective or Vedic vision. So while discussing this point, I was making a point here, which is from Prabhupada personally. What do we want to accept? Ultimately, we need some logical proof. Logical proof means a scientific proof. All the theories about the creation or the evidences about the creation are only in theory. There's no practical proof of it. So whichever among those appears most logical is what we should accept. And what was that logical proof that Srila Prabhupada gives through his writings in this purport here, on the purpose of the chapter, that actually makes us believe, yes, the Vedic version of creation is indeed more factual. What was that point? Hari Bol. That was the most important point. If you forget that, how do you make that transition? हमारे दूरदर्शी भक्तजन, आप कुछ कहना चाहेंगे? What was that logical point? Yes, Prabhu.
Prabhuji, the Vedic point of view says that matter by itself does not grow. As soon as
Perfect.
spirit will be there, it should grow. And since the universe is expanding, it is because of the presence of the super soul, because of which it is expanding.
Perfect. I hope all of you, those who are online, could hear that. Yes, that's the point. How did the universe happen according to the science also? It was a Big Bang explosion, which means it gradually developed into what it is, and it is continued to develop. So example was given of a fetus, from where the child grows. So the child, the matter is a byproduct of spirit in one sense. In other words, the matter can only undergo transformation when there is a spirit behind. However, it is not this spirit which is behind the cause of this creation. Prabhupada makes that point also. What is that? That is Parabrahman. The super soul is behind the cause of this creation. We are behind the expansion of this matter in which we are residing. Like that was a discussion. That was a very important point to at least something to hold on to this particular thing. Apart from that, there was all that discussion about how the Pradhan came, Mahatattva came, and all that, and then how the universes came, how the Virat Roop form manifested, and then there was a discussion of how the different limbs of the Virat Roop was formed, and then finally at the end, there was a discussion on how the four Varnas and Ashramas, particularly four Varnas, came into existence. When we were talking about the four Varnas, we were briefly discussing on the subject of we were talking yesterday about why Hindus are hated worldwide generally. I mean, one thing, and it's so deep rooted. We are surprised why people would hate us so much if you travel abroad. And those religions which are, Christianity is known for crusaders, and Islam today is known for terrorism. Crusader is nothing but was terrorism. You all might have heard of knights. The knights were the first terrorists. We don't call them as terrorists, but they're called as knights, and they are portrayed as a great heroes of the Europe. But you know what they would do? There's something 1,000-year-old history. When they would go out, who were these knights? These are religious fanatics. They would enter the other kingdom, and they would engage into forced conversions. And if people would not convert, they'll burn the whole village in town, and everyone would be killed. They'll brutally kill everyone. These are called as knights. So some historians believe in retaliation to the actions of these knights, this whole idea of jihad came into existence in Islam. Of course, I don't know. This is the belief of some historians. If the jihadis were first or the knights were first, that I don't know. I'm just making a point what the historians believe. That 1,000 years ago, approximately, the knights, and what was the reason of it? The whole place of conflict, which is even up to today, was this Palestine. Not Palestine, what is this called as? Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a place of conflict, where for more than 1,000 years, 1,600 years is around Islam. That much is, the region. So around 1,000 years ago, the Christians had been driven away from this place called Jerusalem. And the fight since then, who would dominate Arab, had been going on. And like that, the historical or geographical space of Arab had been changing consistently over the span of last 2,000 years like that. So if you want to call Christianity historically, you can call them crusaders who gave birth to crusaders. Islam who gave birth to terrorism. Now, what did Hinduism give birth to? They call it casteism. You getting it? What did Hinduism give birth to? Casteism. Somehow they consider casteism to be more sinful or more terrorizing than even the crusaders and terrorists. Whatever it is, I don't know, but that's how it's the perspective of the people. And we had people defending within this country also. Annie Besant and many other who started different organizations here, even the Arya Samajis and all that, they were all kind of in retaliation to overcome this casteism, even the Ambedkarwadis, etc. The Vedic perspective, the Vedic philosophy, the right understanding, and they accepted the European philosophy or the way of looking at the world. And that's how they started teaching. So the main cause of the degradation of this scientific division of society known as Varnashrama was, what is the foundation of Varnashrama Dharma? Seva. Brahmana serves, Kshatriya serves, Vaishya serves, Shudra serves. And why it collapsed? Prabhupada said this whole Varna represents the body of the Virat Roop, where Brahmanas came from the mouth of the Virat Roop. So you cut off the different limbs, the body can still survive. But if you cut off the head, nothing can survive. So which means the moment the Brahmanas become corrupted, the whole society collapses. And that is what kind of happened because they became exploitative. And that's the reason I had gone to this place called as what? Our Varanasi. Before lockdown, before COVID, I had taken a yatra there. So I remember we were at this place. We have our Lord Shiva's temple. Somehow I'm skipping names right now, I don't know why. But there's a very famous temple of Lord Krishna also, where the pujaris from Maharashtra, they are serving. Huh? Bindu Madhav, yes. There we were there, right outside the temple. Right at the bank of Ganges, there we were there. And this Archaeological Survey of India, ASI man was standing there. And he said, oh, you can see we are tourists, you can understand. Oh, let me give you a tour of this place. Let me tell you the history of this place. So Bindu Madhav, where the Bindu Madhav, if any one of you have been there, Bindu Madhav was not there. Right opposite to Bindu Madhav is a big fort where Bindu Madhav was there before. And the Aurangzeb broke that, turned it into a mosque. And then Bindu Madhav was moved from there, was brought into a temporary makeshift place. And right now there is a single story building. And that single story building in one room, which is vertically like this, smaller room, there Bindu Madhav is kept. So this ASI guy began to speak to me, Varanasi. There were many instances. I'll just share one instance when he began to speak to me. And he said, what is the history of this place? I said, okay, tell me the history. I don't want to go into too much details, but just to make a point, you understand this whole subject of Varnashram and why people have a misunderstanding about Hinduism. And our major responsibility now to help overcome this misunderstanding by preaching what Prabhupada have given us, you know, in that sense. So he said, actually, Aurangzeb did not break any of these things. The Brahmanas here, there was a Hindu king here who was ruling then. And when the daughter was about to get married, the Brahmanas of this Lord Shiva's temple, what is that temple called? Varanasi. Kashi Vishwanath temple. The Brahmanas of Kashi Vishwanath. So here in Kashi Vishwanath temple, at that point of time, the marriage was supposed to happen of a Hindu king's daughter. And the Brahmanas of Kashi Vishwanath, at one particular evening before the marriage to happen, they raped the daughter of the king. And then, because the ruler was overall was Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb got to know, he became very angry, and he sent his minister. This is Archaeological Survey of India's employee, ASI agent. We call it agent or what? Who gives truth to the people. And then he said, and then Aurangzeb, when he got to the news of this, he was very angry, and he sent his minister. And then minister came here, Matlab, another Muslim man came here, and he killed all the Brahmanas of this Kashi Vishwanath temple. And out of anger, the Hindu king destroyed the temple. And I was like shocked. I said, really? And what happened? He said, and then when Aurangzeb came here, so this Muslim minister was so kind-hearted, he decided to accept this lady who had been raped by the Brahmanas as his wife. But this lady was not willing to get married to a Muslim because Hindus are fanatics. So when Aurangzeb came here and when he saw the man is forcefully accepting this Hindu lady and Hindu lady doesn't want to get married, then Aurangzeb killed, beheaded his own minister to protect the integrity of the Hindu lady. So great were the Muslims. And you know, his name was written there. He was a Brahman. He was a Brahman. When I further digged into it and then I told what was actual history, and we had almost a long discussion there. Then I got to know he was a Brahman before, and discrimination against Brahmanas in certain part of UP is there. Prior to meeting this ASI agent, right outside Kashi Vishwanath temple, there are places where they make announcements at chalk. That I met one person, when he saw me, he came to meet me, and he began to speak that he works for All India Radio. And he said, I have to change my name. He said, I was a Brahmana. Because I was a Brahmana, I was so much discriminated in the company. They would not give me promotion. I was so much taunted. And gradually I had to change my name and accept another name. And similarly, this ASI agent who was born into a Brahmin family changed his name into a non-Brahmin family. And now he goes around speaking about how Brahmanas were responsible for everything. And this is back in India. This is not something happening in Peshawar or somewhere. This is honestly, and so much misunderstanding is there. But yes, the reason I'm sharing this, somewhere, somehow the Brahmanas were also at mistake, but that has been taken out of context, and so much wrong stories have been concocted and created around it. So nonetheless, that was our main discussion yesterday on that, how service, and therefore Prabhupada says, not Prabhupada, Maitri Muni says, service attitude is what pleases the Lord. And all the ashrams, all the varnas are supposed to be in that attitude of seva. And then that's a preaching application we had, that only by, re-establishing, in other words, the society based on the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, we can eradicate this kind of misconceptions. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult. All these concepts of, you might have heard of patriarchy and all that. What is this? This is coming out dominance of one over other. Over other castes. That is why they keep on bashing again and again. So that's a little background to that. Let's come from, I believe we discussed up to 34th verse until yesterday, right? And now we'll begin our discussion on the 35th verse. So here, 35th to 40th verse, Maitreya Muni says, my dear Vidurji, it is impossible to describe Lord's glories. What to speak for me, even Brahma and even Lord himself cannot fully comprehend his own glories. So in other words, the whole focus here in the purpose would be for all those jnanis who are trying to, on the strength of their knowledge, find out the absolute truth, are just wasting their time. Stop searching, start serving is a kind of a message in these verses. So let's begin text number 35. Let me share the Veda base. 3.6 points. Ete Shattar Bhagavato Daiva Karmatma Rupinaha Kaha Shraddhayat Upakartam Yoga Maya Balodayam. Actually, we discussed this verse yesterday, where Shraddhaya is being described as two ways. Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur describes his word as who can desire, and here Srila Prabhupada describes his word as who can aspire. Who can desire to speak about something which you cannot even imagine, cannot understand? And Srila Prabhupada then the purport raises a point from the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Even Arjuna, although he saw, yet he could not understand. So who can fathom the inconceivable glories of the Lord like that? So what is the best path? The best path Prabhupada gives in the purport, the last few lines. How do we understand? This is the answer. Please read ahead.
The best path is to become a cool-headed, submissive devotee of the Lord. Try to hear about the Lord from the bona fide spiritual master and thus serve the Lord in transcendental loving service, as suggested in the previous verse.
Now, text number 36. So if I cannot, then why did I speak all this thing? It's for my purification. Tathapi kirtayami anga yathamati yathashrutam kirtim hare swam satkartum giram anyabhidhashitam. So question can be raised, well, if the Lord's glories cannot be comprehended, you could have told Vidurji before, why did you all discuss all this thing? So Maitreya Muni says, Sat Kartum, Kirtim Hare Swam Sat Kartum, for the purification, Giram, my ability to speak or to purify my tongue, Anya Bhi Dhasitam. Otherwise, it always engages in unchaste topics. Tathapi Kirtiyami Anga, because of you or therefore, in other words, I got this opportunity to sing or glorify the Lord. Yatamati Yatashrutam, how did I do? Yatashrutam. As I heard from my bona fide special master, Yathamati, whatever I heard, and then whatever I understood, whatever I could understood, the message of my special master, Kirtim Hare Swam Sat Kartum, I have narrated to you for the purpose of my own purification. Please read the translation. We can read Vishnu Chakravarti's translation and the highlighted purport.
In spite of my inability,
Vishnu Chakravarti's
O Vidura, I have thus described to you the glories of the Lord, as I have heard from Guru, and according to my intelligence, in order to purify myself of speaking other subjects.
Purport.
I describe what I have heard from Guru, Yatha Shrutam, and according to how much I have understood, Yatha Matihi, according to my intelligence. That means he did not describe anything he heard. I do this to purify Satkartum, my words which have been contaminated, Asatim, by topics other than the Lord.
So that means he did not describe everything he heard, which means he could not describe everything. He described only those what he could understood. Now, there is a little clarification needed. It might lead to some ambiguity now. Does it mean unless we realize and understand, we don't share? No, we, as Srila Prabhupada said to his disciples, whatever you heard from me, just repeat it. That is also allowed. It is not that unless we have understood, realized, and digested, we don't start sharing Krishna consciousness. Here, Maitreya Muni is making a point, whatever in this subject matter I have understood, I'm describing it to you. I mean, he's not referring any textbook and speaking. You're getting a point, na? If you and I have to discuss and you ask me a question about how Sarga happened, if you happen to do that, then I would also say the same thing. Whatever I best understood in my Bhakti Vaibhav batch, I'm able to describe to you. But it may not be that I remember everything. But if I have a textbook which I have right now, I'm able to refer and tell you whatever was taught. You getting a point? So here Maitri Muni is speaking in this line, but it does not mean that when an opportunity is there for us to share, we don't share because, oh, I have not realized soul. I have only understood theoretically. No, we still speak it. That's just a point, not to have a confusion here. Prabhupada makes a point about consciousness, about activity. There will be this discussion again also on this uh, importance of purifying ourselves by engaging in service to the Lord. So the point here is the consciousness cannot be inactive. By nature, it is active. And Prabhupada says, consciousness. Please read out the highlighted portion from Prabhupada's purport.
Consciousness cannot be silent, even for a moment. When the body does not act, the consciousness acts in the form of dreams. Unconsciousness is artificial. By induced extraneous help, it remains for a limited period. But when the intoxication of the drug is finished, or when one is awake, the consciousness again acts earnestly.
So the consciousness is going to perform some other action. It is always active. So what is the best way of engaging the consciousness? The best way of engaging the consciousness or to purify the consciousness is to engage in speaking about the Lord or as serving the Lord. This is what Prabhupada writes here in this. He explains what Maitri Muni meant by yatha mati yatha shrutam, that I have whatever I have understood. So that's what Prabhupada explains here. Prabhupada says Maitreya's statement, in order to avoid unchaste conscious activities, he was trying to describe the glories of the Lord. He agreed that he did not have the ability to describe them perfectly. Now, Prabhupada said, this glorification is not a subject matter of research. But how did he explain that? Yatha Shrutam, by hearing from his spiritual master. Now, very important. It is not possible to repeat all that one has heard from his spiritual master. But one can narrate as far as possible by one's honest endeavor. It does not matter whether the Lord's glories are fully explained or not. Why it does not matter? Because it is not possible. The following verses will describe, and I'll give you references from Bhagavatam only, where even the Lord says that I don't understand my own glories because it's ever increasing. So how can we ever comprehend and describe it fully? So what one should do? One must attempt to engage one's bodily, prana, artha, dhiya, manasa, vacha, like that is described, in the activities of the transcendental glorification of the Lord. Otherwise, they remain unchaste. And then Prabhupada goes in the purport, talks about three dandi sannyasi and ekadanda sannyasi. In Vaishnava tradition, what sannyasis we have? Ekadanda or three danda? What is three dandi sannyasi means? Body, mind, and senses. Again, it means engaging the activities in the service of the Lord. That's a point Prabhupada makes here, like that. Then text number 37. I have described all this for my purification. And then Maitri Muni says the highest gain in this creation is the facility to hear about Krishna. Ekanta labham chasono pumsam shushlo kamali gunavadamahu Shrute Shavidvadvirupakratayam Katha Sudhayam Upasam Prayogam. Ekant Labham, you can say the highest benefit or the only benefit, which has no comparison. Vachaso Pumsam is the highest benefit or only benefit in this whole creation, which has no comparison, is to have the facility for discussion. Shushloka Mali Gunavadam Ahu, for the discussion on the glorification of the Shushloka Mali, the wonderful activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Then next line, Shrutescha Vidvadbhir Upakritayam. So it is mentioned Upakritayam means being so edited. By whom? By the learned. Or to hear about the narrations being described in the wonderful books written by the learned sages. Like that being described. Katha Shudhayam Upasamprayogam. And this is what? Upasamprayogam. This is what serves the real purpose, which means becoming closer to the Lord. Please read Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's translation.
O Vidura, it is said that describing the qualities of the Lord is the highest attainment for men's words. It is also said that the highest attainment of mankind is hearing the sweet topics of the Lord, which are described by the learned.
Yeah, it is the highest attainment. And yeah, Prabhupada talks about writing. Please read our Prabhupada translation.
The highest perfectional gain of humanity is to engage in discussions of the activities and glories of the pious actor. Such activities are so nicely arranged in writing by the greatly learned sages that the actual purpose of the ear is served just by being near them.
And that is what Prabhupada writes. So these transcendental activities. So from here it says, Srila Jiva Goswami therefore concludes that topics regarding the transcendental activities of the Lord are far greater than the happiness attained through Kavalya. Now, these transcendental activities are so arranged. Please read out. In books
These
like Srimad
transcendental-
Bhagavatam.
These transcendental activities of the Lord are so arranged in writing by the great sages that simply by hearing of those narrations, one becomes perfectly self-realized, and the proper use of the ear and the tongue is also achieved. Srimad Bhagavatam is one of such great literatures, and the highest perfection state of life is attained simply by hearing and reciting its contents.
So now, after saying that the Lord's glories are inconceivable, cannot be described, I have tried to describe it to the best of my ability, whatever I heard. Yatha Shutam, Yathamati, Yatha Shutam. And now saying, hearing or discussion, having discussion on these glories to be the highest benefit in this world, nothing can be compared to it. Now, in verse number 38, Maitri Muni gives an example of how the Lord's glories are inconceivable. He gives an example and he quotes Brahma. Atmano avasito vassa mahima kavinadina samvatsara sahasrante Andhya yoga vipakaya. Oh, what's means my dear son? Oh, Vidurji, Lord's glory is Mahima, even Adi Kavi, Kavi na Dina, which means Brahmaji, even he cannot understand. Samvatsara Sahasrante, he who meditated for a long 1000 celestial years, yet after that he could not comprehend. Dhya yoga means meditation. Vipakkaya, even after his 1000 years long meditation or samadhi, he could not, in that mature stage also, could understand the glories of the Lord. Please read out the translation.
O Vidura, even Brahma did not comprehend the powers of the Lord for 1000 years by mature yoga.
The similar thing is being discussed in the second canto, the same thing, 6th chapter, verse number 35. Please read out the translation where it is mentioned how Brahmaji. So it's Brahmaji speaking to Narad Muni. Second chapter, chapter number 4 to chapter number 7, initial verses are being spoken by Brahma to Narada, when Narada asked question in the 4th chapter. So here Brahmaji himself speaking. And there what we are reading is Maitri Muni quoting. So please read what Brahmaji said to Narad Muni. Translation.
Although I am known as the great Brahma, perfect in the disciplic succession of Vedic wisdom, and although I have undergone all austerities and am an expert in mystic powers and self-realization, and although I am recognized as such by the great forefathers of the living entities who offer me respectful obeisances, still I cannot understand him, the Lord, the very source of my birth.
So here, here Brahma is himself saying that I cannot understand him. Vishnu Chakrathakura writes something beautiful in the purport. I performed austerity first, tapa, ordered by the Lord. Then I gained the knowledge of the Lord. I received powers from the Lord, and I'm worshipped by the Prajapatis. Do not say that I do not have powers of yoga. With concentrated mind, I practiced skillful yoga, dhyana yoga. Okay. But I did not know the Lord because He's my creator. Oh, then how can those created by me, though they think they know something, know Him? Those who say that the existence of the Lord is secondary are blind. When I, directly created by my Father, empowered by Him, in one sense, the most perfected being in this creation, cannot know Him, then how can those who are created for me can claim to say that they know something about Him? That's the point. It's a direct slap on the faces of scientists who are trying to discover about Lord exists or not. You can highlight this and I always quote it out as it is. Brahmaji is saying like that. All right, let's go back to our verse, what we were reading. Third canto, chapter number 6, verse number 38, right? Yeah. So coming to the purport here. So Prabhupada focuses on two things: foolish philosophers versus devotees. Foolish philosophers, which means jnanis, they want to understand the Lord by philosophy and mental speculation. But they don't understand the glories of the Lord are inestimable or inconceivable. The foolish philosophers, in fact, they criticize the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Lord Brahma underwent severe austerities, it is already mentioned. And then this is something interesting verse from Brahma Samhita. It is said in Brahma Samhita, the mental speculator may fly through the sky of speculation with the velocity of the mind or the wind for thousands of millions of years, still he will find it inconceivable. The devotees, however, do not waste time in such vain searching after knowledge of Supreme. In the same second canto, 6th chapter, in one of the purports, Prabhupada writes, why the Lord, in the next verse it will be mentioned, even the Lord cannot understand His glories. So there in the second canto, one of the purports Prabhupada mentions, why the Lord is not able to understand? By the time Lord comprehends His glories have already increased multiple times. There is a transcendental competition going on between the Lord's glories, His ability to understand His glories, and how His glories keep on manifesting more and more. Therefore, because of competition, even Lord finds His glories inconceivable. Like that, it is mentioned. So, this is about mental speculators. Prabhupada called them foolish, foggish philosophers. And then, what is how the Mahatmas, the devotees of the Lord, act? They just take shelter of that. This is what we can read. Nice way Prabhupada explained like this. Prabhupada quotes from the 9th chapter, Mahatmanas Tumam Pata Doshloka. What is the duty of a devotee? Please read out the highlighted portion.
The pure devotees of the Lord take shelter of para Prakriti, the internal potency of the Lord, called Lakshmi Devi, Sita Devi, Srimati Radharani, or Srimati Rukmani Devi, and thus they become actual Mahatmas or great souls. Mahatma are not fond of indulging in mental speculations, but they actually take to the devotional service of the Lord without the slightest deviation. Devotional service is manifested by the primary process of hearing and chanting about the activities of the Lord. This transcendental method practiced by the Mahatmas gives them sufficient knowledge of the Lord, because if the Lord can at all be known to some extent, it is only through the means of devotional service and no other way.
And now there's a further example of Lord's inconceivability or the inconceivability of His glories in text number 39. Maitreya Muni says, Ato Bhagavato Maya Mayi Namapi Mohini Yasmayam Chatma Vartmatma Na Vedakim Utapare. Translation. Somebody online would like to read, please.
The wonderful potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is bewildering even to the jugglers. That potential power is unknown even to the self-sufficient Lord. So it is certainly unknown to others.
Something like this. Our Guruji mentions in second canto, chapter number 6, verse number 36. What he says there? Please read out Prabhupada translation, Prabhu.
Therefore, it is best for me to surrender unto his feet, which alone can deliver one from the miseries of repeated birth and death. Such surrender is all auspicious and allows one to pursue all happiness. Even the sky cannot
He
estimate
gives
the
an analogy to explain that. He says, even the sky cannot estimate the limits of his own expansion. So here sky is compared to the Lord. So what can others do when the Lord himself is unable to estimate his own limits? So the conclusion is, uh, if when you go through this whole discussion, the discussion which we are about to do in the 7th chapter, you might find something little repetitive. And the repetitive theme here would be give up mental speculation. Too much thinking on this concept or the subject matter of the Lord. Rather, start serving the Lord. That is the whole thing. As I said, the whole theme is stop searching, start serving. The problem with this whole froggish philosophers that Prabhupada is writing in the purpose, that they spend too much time in searching on the absolute truth on their own strength. They think by their own power they'll find out, and they end up, as Prabhupada many times calls in his purport, the last snare of Maya is to consider oneself to be God. I remember I was there in one place, one retreat center back in America. It was of Mayavadis. I didn't know at that point of time what is Mayavadi, frankly speaking. So I had gone for some yoga sessions there. Very beautiful place. So there, on the second day, there was an initiation ceremony. And for the first time, I'm seeing any initiation ceremony. I have not attended any initiation ceremony that time. I was new to ISKCON also that time. The second day, there's an initiation ceremony, and I was living in a room with a boy who was from Canada. And the next door, it was like, what do you call it? How do you say? Quarters, you can say. It's whole forest, and you have one quarter and a separate quarter like that. Uh-huh. Chambers, you can call it chambers, you want to call it whatever you call it that way. So like that, and the next chamber was some two ladies were there like that. It was all spread around that area. So this guy's name was some Daniel or something, I don't remember exactly. And his initiation was happening. So I said, okay, he called me, my initiation is there. Why don't you come? So we were friends for 2 days. So I said, okay, I'll also come. I'm here anyways. So there was in the forest, the initiation ceremony is happening. And very interesting what happened there. So they are taught to study Vedas, Vedantas like that. Major emphasis on yogas and all that, Patanjali Yoga Sutras, and a little bit of, and of course they study Bhagavad Gita also. Every day in that ashram used to be Bhagavad Gita class in the evening, 7 to 8:30. Thank God I never attended it. Probably I would not have been here otherwise. I would have attended. I did not attend those classes. So this guy got the name Ganesh Das or Ganesh Das or something like that. He got the name. And then the lady who was in the next chamber next to me, one got the name of Lakshmi, other got the name of Kali, like that. So one was American, other was African American. I thought maybe because of color they have got the name or something. I was assuming, I had no idea. So when that whole ceremony ended, so I met them. I said, why did you got the name Ganesh? Why did you got the name of Lakshmi and you got the name of Kali? So I was a little careful to ask this question because they should not think, I'm having a bias in my consciousness. So he said, I was at a distance, so I didn't hear what's the conversation happened between the so-called guru and the disciple. So he said, in our initiation process, what happens is, so when a disciple goes in front of the guru asks, so who is your Isht Devta? In other words, what would you like to become? So this fellow said, I like Ganeshi. He looks very cute. Particularly, I like his nose. So he said, I like, and he had Ganeshi's photo also. So I told him, I like Ganeshi. So he gave me the name Ganesh Das or Ganesh, something like that. And then I understood that the other lady probably would have had attraction for Lakshmi. And the third one definitely had attraction for Kali. So their whole thing, he said, is to chant the mantra of these devtas. You chant the mantra as devtas, and then what happens? He said, then gradually our process, what we are told is, then after some years of practice, you will come to a realization that you are Ganesh, you are Lakshmi, and you are Kali, whatever you become, or you are Shiva. And then you stop chanting because now you've become like that. So every day they had Bhagavad Gita classes, huh? And from Bhagavad Gita classes, somehow they were making them convinced on this whole subject matter that you can become Ganesh, you can become Lakshmi, you can become Kali and all that. After 3 days, I felt like as if I'm living in a, Agra's mental hospital. In Agra, there's one famous mental hospital. The way these people will talk about their learning and all that. And after that, I got Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. When I read Bhagavad Gita, it was so simple. There was no ambiguity. So Prabhupada would mention again and again about word jugglery. And their writings and what they speak is so confusing. Why people still get attracted, sorry, because only thing the person understand is your God. Nobody understands anything about what they're talking. Only thing which is understood by a common man is you are God and I have got the mantra that can make you God. And for that, people are willing to go ahead with it. Otherwise, they don't understand anything what's going on in the life like that. So here we will find certain this froggish philosophers and then how Lord is inconceivable and Lord can be understood by only bhakti. We've been discussing yesterday also about it. And in the 7th chapter, again, this discussion will come a little bit again. Why this is, and this is not for the first time happening in 3rd canto, this has happened in 2nd canto also. Why this is, if somebody asks you, why there's so much repetition in our scriptures? What is the answer? There's a repetition? Yes, agreed. Why there's a repetition? In fact, I'm showing you equivalent verses in the 2nd canto. Yesterday, the whole discussion we had, I showed you exactly equivalent verses in 2nd canto. And the same thing, only with the minor differences, we had the prayers of Devatas. And here in 3rd canto, it was mentioned by the glance of the Lord, everything happened. There it was not mentioned like that. Same thing has been repeated. And interestingly, in the same chapter number, 6, like that. Why there is a repetition?
Prabhupada in the 2nd chapter, 25th verse, last sentence, Prabhupada writes that there also Krishna tells about the soul, the same thing, like it cannot be cut, it cannot be burnt, it cannot be weathered. Same thing again and again tells. And Prabhupada in the last sentence makes it, Prabhupada writes that Krishna is repeating it so that to make the subject matter clearly understandable to the people. Otherwise, when it is again and again stressed, the importance it is shown and like they can understand it properly. That's what I remember.
Yes, correct. Actually, this is the standard way we understand Vedas. How you learn shlokas? By repetition. So the message in Bhagavad and scriptures are repeated, are presented in a different way, a slightly little bit, but the same concept is repeated. So it goes. It's learned through repetition. One simple example is memorization of shloka like that. If you ever attended any or visited any ashrams of, let's say other sampradaya, every morning their sadhana is shloka recitation. And that's their everyday practice. For hours together, they come and recite the shlokas. That's the whole point about it. So repetition. So in Vedic scriptures, you would largely find this. This is a common theme. So it's not that Srila Prabhupada is repeating. Sometimes people say, oh, we find Srila Prabhupada's books repetitive. I don't know if ever you have heard it here, but in the West, many times this question is, oh, Prabhupada have said already, when all this body but soul, why Prabhupada keep repeating it? Because that's how the Vedic education is, the Vedic training. Here, the whole chapter is repetitive in one sense, like that. That's the point here. All right, text number 39, that's what we discussed, try to adjust. And Prabhupada makes a very beautiful example. The devotees of the Lord, we are on which? We are on 6, this thing now? Okay. Let's read something from Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's writing here. Please read out. About how the Lord's glories are inconceivable, the Lord does not understand even.
They cannot survey even the length and breadth of a small sky in one small universe. The so-called material scientist says that he would need to live 40,000 years to reach the highest planet of the universe, being carried by a Sputnik. This is also utopian because no one can be expected to live 40,000 years. Besides, when the space pilot returned from his travel, none of his friends would be present to receive him back as the greatest astronaut, as has become fashionable for modern bewildered scientific men. One scientific man who had no belief in God.
This is Prabhupada writing, huh? Go ahead.
One scientific man who had no belief in God was very much enthusiastic in making plans for his material existence and therefore opened a hospital to save the living. But after opening the hospital, he himself died within 6 months.
So this is what happens with their plans, is what Prabhupada is mentioning here. Let's go back. Just after the 6 months of opening the hospital, he wanted to make some plans, but after 6 months, he only died like that. So Prabhupada says here, the devotees of the Lord see the wonderful dexterity, skill in everything with which they come in contact in all circumstances of eating, sleeping, working. In other words, whatever they see, they kind of they relish the miracles happening day in, day out. And Prabhupada gives an example of one miracle that is happening. A small banyan fruit contains thousands of small seeds, and each seed holds the potency of another tree, which again holds the potential of many millions of such fruits as cause and effects. So the trees and the seeds engage the devotees in meditation about the activities of the Lord. While, please read ahead.
While the mundane wranglers waste time in dry speculation and mental concoction, which are fruitless in both this life and the next. In spite of their pride in speculation, they can never appreciate the simple potential activities of the banyan tree. Such speculators are poor souls destined to remain in matter perpetually.
So, therefore, I say it is better to Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha, to offer our respects to the Supreme Personality Godhead and surrender unto Him. Text number 40th. Yato prapya anvayartanta vachascha manasa saha aham chanya ime deva tasmai bhagavate namaha. I offer respects to that Supreme Lord whom words, along with mind, devtas such as Brahaspati, Rudra, and other could not understand and gave up. And Vishnu Chakravarti talks about that in the purport. We'll focus a few things from Prabhupada's purport here. This is confirmed in the verse by the great sage Maitreya. What is confirmed? Without devotion, with devotion, he offers a sincere surrender. Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha. One has to follow in the footsteps of the great sages and devotees like Maitreya and Vidura, Maharaj Parikshit and Sukdev Goswami, and engage in the transcendental devotional service of the Lord. If one would know his ultimate feature, which is above Brahman and Paramatma. And like that, Maitreya Muni concludes here. Similarly, Brahmaji concludes in the second canto while in conversation with Nath Muni. And he says, Naham na yuyam yadratam gatim vidur na vamadeva kimuta pare suraha tanmaya mohita buddhayast idam vinarmitam chatmasamam vichakshamaye. So Brahmaji is speaking. Please read the translation of both Prabhupada and Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur.
Since neither Lord Shiva, nor you, nor I could ascertain the limits of spiritual happiness, how can other demigods know it? And because all of us are bewildered by the illusory external energy of the Supreme Lord, we can see only this manifested cosmos according to our individual ability.
This is very interesting. Ultimately, our knowledge can take us as far as our ability to experience. Beyond it, for us to fathom, we only have to hear it, and that's how we can get the knowledge. We cannot learn through our senses beyond our experience. You're getting a point? And the simple example is that of frog in the well. You know of the story. The problem with the frog in the well, although he was told there is a larger body of water outside somewhere from where I have come, but he said, no, it cannot be because it is beyond my perception. I have not experienced something like that. So when it comes to understanding things which is beyond our sense perception, it can only be understood through hearing. So what is beyond our sense perception? The first and foremost is Atma. And then comes the Supreme Lord. We cannot understand. Therefore, Prabhupada in second chapter of Bhagavad Gita writes, nobody can see the soul. When it is said in the 26th or 24th or 25th verse, the soul is invisible. What do you mean invisible? Invisible to the material senses. You cannot see the soul through your material instruments. But we know that through the process of yoga, we can come to the stage of self-realization where we understand we're not the body, but the soul. So here, Brahmaji is saying we can see only this manifested cosmos according to our individual ability. And that is where the scientists kind of get stuck. All their efforts to discover, make a discovery, is based on their ultimately sense perception. But we are talking of a subject which is beyond sense perception. And therefore, in the Vedic Paddhati, it is said you can only understand about the Lord by hearing. Just like Maitreya Muni said, Yatha Mati, Yatha Shrutam. I, you, and Shiva, please read out the Vishnu Thakur's translation.
I, you, and Shiva do not know the 3 part spiritual world and the 1 part material world. What to speak of others? Bewildered in intelligence, we speak about the material realm only, and do that according to our limited knowledge.
Even if we speak about the material world, we also speak only according to our limited knowledge. This is interesting. This Brahmaji is speaking, and this, imagine the scientists are trying to make and give us understanding a version of this creation based on their limited knowledge, which means what limited things they're offering to us. They have no comprehension of it. And with this arises the doubt in Vidura's mind. Very interesting. Similarly, on the same line, now Vidurji is also trying to understand. Of course, Vidurji is a pure devotee of the Lord nonetheless. But here now in the next chapter, Vidurji is going to ask a question. Ultimately, everything that we do is based on our perceptions. If we consider something very important, that is the only thing that holds value in our life. And that is what we consider everyone should also accept, isn't it? That's how generally the mood varies. So here Vidurji is going to ask a question now in the next chapter, a series of questions he's going to ask. First, he will ask a question about the Lord, then he'll ask about the Jivas. He said, my dear Maitreya Muni. So when I'm going to say this, please understand in relation to what we're reading here. You're able to understand things according to your ability or perceptions or experiences. You cannot understand beyond it unless we hear. So now Vidurji is going to ask a question to Maitreya Muni. My dear Maitreya Muni, how to understand Supreme Personality of Godhead? Is Atma Yoni fully satisfied? If it is fully satisfied, then why did he create the playthings like this material world and the jivas? Was he dissatisfied? See, unless you have a desire, you will not do anything. And somebody is already self-satisfied, which means he has no desire. Then was there a desire behind this creation? Okay. All right, you say the Lord did not have a desire. But was there somebody else who had a desire for this world to happen? Just like, you go and play. Maybe one day you don't feel like playing and suddenly your friend comes and calls for you. Prabhu, let's go. Of course, they'll not call you Prabhu in those days, whatever they called you. Let's go for play. Then suddenly you feel like, okay, let me go and play. Yes or no? So here Maitreya Muni says, okay, maybe because he's Atma Yoni, he's self-satisfied, he will not have a desire. Maybe he came in contact with another person who had a desire, and therefore this creation happened. But again, it is not true. Why? Because already established before this creation, he was the only one existing. So my dear Maitreya Muni, I'm confused. I see this as a contradiction. Either Lord had a desire or Lord developed a desire in association with somebody. In association with somebody is not possible. And he has a desire means he is not Atma Yoni. But fact is, the material world is created. Why did he create this material world then? What was the purpose behind it? So please resolve this contradiction. Then he would ask, my dear Maitreya Muni, how do we understand? You're saying the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Nirgunasya, beyond the modes of material nature. Yet, the Virat true form is what? Is a material creation? Yes or no? The Virat Rupa is a material form. Then how come Lord accepted a form of matter? A form of matter means being influenced by the modes of material nature. This body is what? A body is nothing made of modes of material nature, combination of different degrees of goodness, passion, ignorance. So you say the Lord is Nirgunasya, the Lord is beyond. If Lord is to be accepted as completely spiritual in existence, then how did he got covered over by matter? And this is also a contradiction. Please resolve. And when Maitreya Muni heard this question, so we'll see this. I'm just giving a little bit of prelude here. When Maitreya Muni heard this question, he was astonished. And he said, Arey, itne difficult question nahi puchte. आसान question पूछो. Like, you see that? It's mentioned, Maitri Muni was astonished for a second. But in the very next line, it is mentioned because he was so absorbed in the Lord. So Vishnu Chakravarti writes, he prayed to the Lord, my dear Lord, क्या question पूछा इसने? इतना जटिल question. So the Lord gave him the remembrance. And then Maitri Muni answers. So we'll see in the third, seventh chapter now, in the first few verses, Vidurji asks question about the Lord and also about the living entities. What did he ask about the living entities? The living entities is also spiritual. So question arises, how does this living entity who's spiritual became ignorant, fell victim to ignorance? Now we are in what situation I am in? I'm ignorant, I don't know. So how did something who's Satchit Ananda became victim to ignorance? Then he asked second question. We are part and parcel of the Lord. And we have heard that the super soul resides with the soul, which means the Lord is always with us. Even if not that, we are part of the Lord's body. We are ansha of the Lord. Then how can we can undergo misery? How can we can undergo misery? If we are part and parcel of the Lord is with us. So does it mean the Lord is allowing us to go through misery? What is happening here? Like that, he asked question about Jiva, and that forms the discussion of your first initial few verses of the seventh chapter. And after that, when Maitri Muni answers, beautiful answers that he gives, and then Vidurji shares his realizations on the answers that he heard. And he expresses his deepest gratitude. And then in the last section of the seventh chapter, from verse number 28, if I'm correct, 28 onwards, seventh chapter, right? Yeah, sorry, 21 verses onward, 21st to 38 verse, then Vidurji asked series of questions, which are similar to the questions asked by our Parishit Maharaj in the seventh chapter of the second canto is all about the questions. And then Sukhdev Goswami offers gratitude and prayers to the Lord to answer that. So those same series of questions are asked by Vidurji. So as I said in the very first day, what we are seeing here is through the Vidur and Maitreya conversation, Sukhdev Goswami is trying to answer Parishit Maharaj's question here. That was goes on. So let's begin with the seventh chapter. Is there anything anyone wants to clarify or discuss before we move forward? We have already read that, this thing, correct? Okay, let's go back. Third canto, chapter number 7, verse number 1. Shri Shukavacha Evam Bruvana Maitreyam Andvaipayana Suto Buddha Prinayan Eva Bhartaya Vidura Pratyabhashata. So Sukhdev Goswami is speaking and he says, Dvaipayana Suto, the son of Dvaipayana Vyasadeva, which is Vidurji, Buddha, very learned in himself. Evam Bruvanam, after Maitreya Muni spoke like this, then Dvaipayana Suta Buddho, the learned son of Vyasadeva, then he expressed Pratyabhashata, he spoke to Maitreya Muni. How did he spoke? Prina eva bhartaya. He spoke in a very pleasing tone to Maitri Muni. What did he say? Second verse. Viduruvacha Brahman katham bhagavatas chinmatrasya vikarinaha Leelaya chapi yujayeran Nirgunasya guna kriya. So text number 2 to text number 4, Vidurji would raise a question about the Lord, where he finds a contradiction. What contradiction he finds? as I said, universal form has been created, seems like it's material. So does it mean Nirgunasya Gunakriya, the one who is beyond the modes of material nature, have accepted or have come under the influence of modes of material nature? Brahman Katham Bhagavatas. Katham, how? How the Supreme Personality Godhead, Chinmatrasya, who is completely spiritual, Avikarinaha, and who is unchangeable, does not get transformed into anything. Lilaya, is it his pastime that he has accepted this material form? Chapi Yujyeran Nirgunasya, who is beyond the modes of material, Gudha Kriya, and how come he performs activities in this world? Is it part of his Leela or is it something else? Please read the translation of Srila Prabhupada.
Shri Vidura said, O great Brahmana, since the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the complete spiritual whole and is unchangeable, how is he connected with the material mode of nature and their activities? If this is his pastime, how do the activities of the unchangeable take place and exhibit qualities without the mode of nature?
He is unchangeable. Yet he took birth, he appeared in this world, and at least he went up to the stage of Kishora. He went through certain changes. Something like this we read about in this third canto itself, where Uddhav also expressed, I believe in the fourth chapter was it, this verse, Karamani anihasya. He performs actions, yet he does not have any desire. Karamani anihasya bhavo bhavasyate. Bhavo, he appears. Abhavasya, he is unborn. Durga Shaya, Durga Shaya Thari Ari Bhayat Palayanam. Durga Shraya, Durga means fort. He took shelter of the fort. Ari Bhayat, Atha, thereafter, Atha Ari Bhayat Palayanam. And when he became fearful, what he did? He ran away. This is being discussed in context of Jarasandha. Durga Shayathari Bhayat Palayanam. Kalatmano Yat Pramadayutashramah. Yet he is Kalatmano. He is time personified. Time is the all destroyer. Kalatmano. Yet he is fear personified. He becomes fearful. How to understand? He does not have desire. He performs work. He does not take birth. He is birthless. He takes birth. He is fear personified. He becomes fearful. Kalatmano yat pramadayutashramah. Pramadayut ashrama. Pramada means madness. Pramada has different meanings. Pramadayut ashrama. He was part of the ashram which makes you mad. Means grahastha ashram. In one sense, pramada means madness. Pramadayut ashrama. Yet swatmen rati khidyati. Swatmen rati. He is like Atma Yoni. He is self-satisfied. And this bewilders the intelligence of all the learned sages. How do we understand this contradictory nature of the Supreme Personality Godhead? Something like that is being asked by Vidurji here to Matthew Mani. He is Nirgunasya, but yet he performs his activities in this world. How can we understand that? So there are two kinds of questions which are asked according to Vishnu Chakrati Thakur here. Please read the purport of Vishnu Chakrati Thakur, which is highlighted.
How can a spiritual entity have activities like creation of the universe with gunas like sattva, rajas, and tamas? Vidura has not used the word chinmaya or chidrupa, but the word matrasya. The word limit the Lord to only spiritual substance with no trace of matter. However, Maya, the material gunas, was described in the verse quoted from chapter 5 as being a Shakti.
So in chapter 5, it was described how Maya is the Shakti of the Lord. Krishna is a potent and Maya is his potency. Like that is being quoted here. Because the Lord,
Because the Lord cannot be separated from his Shakti, the Lord must have material gunas. How can that be possible that he has these gunas if he is only exclusively spiritual chinmatra? And if he has these gunas, how can he be considered completely
so
spiritual?
Chin Matrasya means the Lord is completely spiritual. And Maya is his energy. Is this something like that, that Shaktiman cannot be separate from Shakti? If that's the case, then which means he possesses the modes. If he possesses the modes, then how can we say he's exclusively spiritual? That is the first question being asked. What is the second question? Go ahead.
Transformation is caused by time and is a quality of the
So
gunas.
avi karinaha is unchangeable. In that context is the second question. Go ahead.
Because the Lord is purely spiritual, if he is without change, how can he perform action indicate changes? Which indicate change. If he perform actions, how can he be spiritual?
So his actions, there, as I said, he's even in leelas in this world, which which briefly discussed about, there is a change. So how it can be possible? Because he is avikarinaha. Like that, the two questions are being raised in this particular shloka here. Ha. So we'll come to this in a short while. Let's take a look what Prabhupada says in his purport, how he describes it. So how do we understand? Of course, you will read about the answers later on in the third canto. But here Prabhupada explains how do we understand this. So first, Prabhupada talks about his multifarious energies. The Lord, we can read from here in the purport.
The Lord, through the agency of his multifarious energies, but this manifestation is bewildering to the living
So Lord
entities.
creates this universe through his multifarious energies. But this is bewildering to the living entities. The Lord is the master, whereas living entities are subjugated by them. The point here made is the Lord, Devi Esha Gunamai Mamamaya Duratya. Otherwise, what is that? Maya Dakshena Prakriti Suete Sacharacharam. Prakriti is my energy. Like 7th chapter, verse number 4 and 5th. What is that? Bhumir aponalo vayu kamano buddhirevacha aparayamitastvanya. So, which means the matter and jiva are both my energy, but they are potency, not potent. So Krishna is potent. So the potency can never subjugate potent, but one potency can subjugate another potency. Just like the living entity considered to be superior energy in comparison to matter, which is compared to inferior energy, is trying to exploit matter. Similarly, this material energy, which is the potency of the Lord, supersedes the living entity, covers them. But the potent is never covered, is the main discussion in this purport. Of course, Prabhupada has given an answer right now only, but this will be described later on also. So please continue reading now.
By asking various questions about transcendental activities, Vidura is clearing the misconception that when the Lord either descends on the earth in his incarnation or appears himself with all his potencies, he too be subjected to the influence of Maya, just like an ordinary living
So
entity.
Mayavadis had made this subject matter so famous, everyone thinks the Lord appears like human. And the laws of human beings, the what we have to undergo, also have to go undergo with the Lord. So Lord also experiences the kidnapping of Mother Sita, or whatever happened in Mahabharata for that reason. All those things, it's just because the laws of karma, like that people say, and this is all established by Mayavadis. We'll come about Mayavadis in a short while, but that's the point here Paul making. The Lord is described in this verse as Chinmatra, completely spiritual. The Supreme Personality of Godhead. You see this? Yeah. This is about his Bhutva Bhutva Praliyate. Again, the same point, potent and potency. Please read out the highlighted portion.
The personality of Godhead has unlimited potencies to create and manifest many wonderful things, both temporary and permanent. Because this material world is the creation of his external energy, it does appear to be temporary. It is manifested at certain intervals, maintained for some time, and again dissolve and conserve in his own energy, as described in Bhagavad Gita 8.19, Bhutva Bhutva Praliyate.
So first thing, Chinmatrasya, Prabhupada have answered that so far, that everything is happening through his energy. It is not that Maya Tatam Idam Sarvam, 9th chapter also says he's part of this creation, yet not part of this creation. So everything what is happening is through his energies. He is not getting affected by those energy. That's the first thing. Now, second thing, he's unchangeable. So for that beautiful example, Prabhupada, both Vishnu Thakur gives, but Vishnu Thakur gives a little historical example and Prabhupada gives a modern example. And let me make an example simple, what Prabhupada says. He says, just like a magician, by the trick of magic, he can transform himself into a cow. But does it mean he's a cow or he's the same magician? Yes or no? By the trick of his magic, he transforms himself into a cow or a bull, whatever. Does he become a cow or bull? He's still the a magician. Similarly, Krishna, the magician, by the trick of his magic, by the trick of his Maya, transforms himself into the different forms. You getting a point? That's a simple example like that. That makes it very simple. So this is where in the second paragraph, this example is mentioned about it. We can read this here, Vishnu Thakur's example, and then we'll read other examples that Prabhupada gives. Please read out.
One may say that Indra possesses Maya and that Indra become a bull by Maya's power. This means that there is an appearance of bull belonging to Indra created by himself.
Just a magician doing that, right? That's the whole idea.
Similarly, in saying that the Lord has Maya, the Lord becomes the universe by the use of Maya. This means that the Lord has a universal form made of Maya, but this is not the Lord.
So this is through his magic trick, and that is previously described already. The Lord manifests in this world through his potency, and potency does not cover the potent like that. Then Prabhupada gives another example. The restrictions of the prison house are applicable to prisoners who are condemned by the king's law. But if the king has to enter the prison house, he's not going to get tied to those laws there. And then Prabhupada gives a third example. Just in Vishnu Purana, the 6 opulences of the Lord are stated to be not different from him, which means all the exhibition of his opulence, all the Aishwaryas, Aishwarasya Samagrasya Virasya Shashriya, all that is all spiritual. There is nothing material in that. And then Prabhupada gives a fourth example, which is an interesting example. What it means, let me just show you. Second canto, first chapter, there's an interesting verse by Sukdev Goswami. And what he says, oh, why it is not coming? Okay. Let's go here. There's an interesting verse that Sukdev Goswami speaks while describing that how even Atma Ramas are attracted to the Supreme Personality Godhead. And then he gives his own example to Parikshit Maharaj. Parinishchitopi nirguniya uttama shloka leelaya grahita cheta rajashe Akhyanam yad adhitvam. So we know about Sukdev Goswami. He had left the house and then being attracted by the verses from the 10th canto, which his father Vyasadeva had sent his disciples to search for him in the forest. Being attracted to that, he came back. That's what he mentioned here. O saintly king, I was certainly situated in transcendence, yet I was still attracted by the delineation of the person of the Lord who is described by enlightened verses. So what this means, that the point Prabhupada makes it, Atma Ramas Chamani, the first canto talks about it. Sukdev Goswami was a perfected being. Everyone in the assembly where Parikshit Maharaj was sitting accepted him to be a spiritual master, although he was a 16-year-old boy. And that Sukdev Goswami was attracted to the pastimes of the Lord. The Lord who performed the Ras Leela. If that Ras Leela, as the mundane wranglers say, is a mundane sexual affairs, then how is it ever possible Sukdev Goswami, who from his childhood, even beyond his birth, before his birth, who was perfected being, could become attracted to such subject matters, on top of it, describe and narrate to Parikshit Maharaj? Because Sukdev Goswami is describing Ras Leela, it proves it is not mundane. And Sukdev Goswami is attracted to the pastimes of Krishna, it means it has to be spiritual. That is the fourth evidence Prabhupada gives in the purport. How, all that is happening on according to the spiritual energy. There's nothing that have changed like that. So that's the point. And finally, Prabhupada says, the conclusion is that persons who consider the Lord's activities material are certainly mistaken with that. the purport ends. And with that, we'll also take a break now. It's almost 12 o'clock. We'll continue with our discussion where, and text number 3 and onwards, Viduji would raise more questions. However, we don't have to wait for the answers. Prabhupada gives the answers and the purport there and there, what it means. But these questions will be addressed in different sections of Srimad Bhagavatam. Some would be addressed in the third canto, some would be addressed elsewhere in Srimad Bhagavatam. So we'll take a break. It's 12:03, 15 minutes, which means you can come by 12:20, and we'll continue our discussion after that. Hare Krishna. Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So Hare Krishna. So तीसरे श्लोक से आगे चर्चा जारी रखते हैं. So we are on the 7th chapter of 3rd canto. Vidura Muni began to speak to Maitra Muni, and he had a question about the nature of the Lord. If Lord is Chit Matrasya, purely spiritual, then how did he accept a form which is called to be material? Second thing, if he's Nirgunasya, if he's beyond the modes of material nature, then how he's engaged in the activities along with the modes of material nature? The creation happens through the modes of material nature, isn't it? So how the Lord is involved in that? Like that, these kind of two questions have been asked. And Prabhupada gave an answer that the answer for the first thing about how he's purely spiritual. Yes, one is Maya Tatam Idam Sarvam. We can quote that, he's part of this world, is not part of this world. Second thing, he's potent. The potent does not get affected by potency, but potency get affected by potency. And Vidurji's question is coming, as I said in the previous chapter while we're concluding, our ability to comprehend is very much limited by our ability to perceive things. Whatever our perceptions are created, according to that only we see the reality of the world. So Vidurji is saying, oh, well, if we are affected by the modes, so Lord doesn't get affected by the modes. So therefore the subject matter of potency came. No, the Jivatma, of course, this is not that Vidurji has a doubt. This is more of, to help people to understand. No, it's not that potent becomes affected, but Jivatma gets affected. Potency can affect another potency, but the potency cannot affect the potent. That's the point here. That's the first point to understand. In fact, to remember, this is a very important thing. To just remember this. And second, the thing is, then when the Lord is unchangeable, nirgunasya gunaha kriya, yet he performs activities, how it is possible? He takes form like universal form and all that. And what is the example given? Who remembers the example? Huh? Magician, yes. Magician by his magic trick takes another form. Krishna by his Maya Shakti accepts another form. Like that. That's it, simple. Now, text number 3. Oh, screen sharing. क्रीडायामुद्यमो अर्भस्य कामश्चिक्रीदिशान् यतः स्वातस्तृप्तस्य च कथम् निवृत्तस्य सदान्यतः. How does he kridayam? So, and kind of analogy is given. Oh. And kind of Viduji asks a question by giving an analogy. He says, we see the kids are highly enthusiastic to play. Why they're enthusiastic to play? Because they have a desire. Kamas chikri dishan yataha. They have a desire to play. So the Lord, why did Lord created this whole universe? This plaything, right? We saw the sense devas saying that we would like to offer all these playthings for your pleasure. So why did Lord created all these playthings? Because he had a desire? Oh, how can he have desire? He is Atmayoni. Okay. Nirvatasya sadanyata. Or else there is some other reason, some other factor. And that other factor, as I said before, that maybe if not Krishna, if the Lord is nirgunasya or nivratasya for that reason, does not have desire, beyond the modes, maybe somebody else had the desire. And in the association of that person, the Lord got the desire. In this case, Karana Daksha Vishnu. But the point is, nobody existed before the Lord. What is that? Ekapad was mentioned, he alone existed before this creation. That's how the question has been raised here. So Vidurji says, I don't know what's going on. I'm confused. Please read Vishnu Thakur's translation and then the puppet.
Kama is the impetus for playing seen in children. The impetus for Lord's pastimes should be different. How can the desire for play in Lord arise from Kama, since Lord is self-satisfied? How can it arise otherwise, since nothing exists except the Lord?
Sadan yataha, otherwise. What is that otherwise means? Vishnu Thakur explains in his puppet. Please read.
For children, the inspiration for playing is Kama. This is natural cause of inclination for playing. A desire for play arises by impetus of other children. Because the Supreme Lord is self-satisfied, swatas how can Kama be the cause? And since no one exists except the Lord, anyatha nibritasya, how does the desire to play arise by any other influence?
So not possible in the Lord, doesn't have karma, and otherwise also is not possible. So now text number 4. So second to the first shloka is about the Lord. He creates, he maintains, and destroys again and again. Ashrakshit Bhagavan Vishwam Gunamayatma Mayaya Daya Samsthapayati Etat Daya Bhuya Pratyapidhashati. Translation.
By his self-centered potency of the three modes of material nature, the Lord has caused the creation of this universe. By her, he maintains the creation and conversely dissolves it again and again.
So, like that, he speaks. So, Vishnu Chakataku says, the Lord creates this universe by Maya, composed of three gunas, and maintains it by Maya, and also destroys it by Maya. Please read the purport where Prabhupada writes, what is the purpose of this creation?
This cosmic universe is created by the Lord for those living entities who are carried away by the illusory thought of becoming one with him by imitation. The three modes of material nature are for the further bewilderment of the conditioned souls. The conditioned living entity, bewildered by the illusory energy, considers himself a part of the material creation due to the forgetfulness of his spiritual identity. And thus he becomes entangled in material activities life after life. This material world is not for the purpose of the Lord himself, but is for the conditioned souls who wanted to be controllers due to misuse of their God-gifted minute independence. Thus, the conditioned souls are subjected to repeated birth and death.
So, here ends the inquiries about the Lord, like this. Who is completely spiritual, then how did he came in contact with gunas? And if he's unchangeable, how is he performing actions? And then did he had any desire to create this world or not? Like that, there was a question. He's beyond the mode, so he should not have any desire also. Now, from text number 5 and text number 6, Vidurji would ask question about the living entities. Text number 5, Vidurji says, देशतकालतो यो असा अवस्थात स्वतोऽन्यतः अविलुप्तावबोधात्मा सायुज सायुज ये सायुज येता जया कथम. So here the question is asked, how did the living entity, who is also Satchit Ananda, the part and parcel of the Lord, got in contact with matter? How many times in your outreach programs, if we were so happy, why did we came here? How many of you have got that question? People have asked this question. And what is the profound answers that you share? We'd like to hear. what is that profundity that you offer to your audience? अरे इतने खुश थे तो यहाँ क्यों आए? क्या जवाब है? क्या जवाब देते हैं आप? कोई जवाब दें? And like that, this question has been asked here. How did we lost our original consciousness? The pure soul. Please read Prabhupada's translation.
The pure soul is pure consciousness and is never out of consciousness, either due to circumstance, time, situation, dreams, or other causes. How then does he become entangled in innocence?
So this is another interesting discussion which is going to happen now, which is the living entity is always full of knowledge. We have never lost knowledge. And like that, if you see Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur writes, please read what Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur writes.
How can the jiva who knowledge cannot be
Whose
destroyed,
knowledge would be the right thing? Yaar pe?
whose knowledge cannot be destroyed by place, time, condition, nature, or other cause becomes associated with ignorance?
A living entity is full of knowledge. How did he got covered over by ignorance is largely the question. In other words, one who is from the spiritual world, how did he ended up over here? Like that is mentioned here. Okay. Yeah, we can read this. Okay, another question arises. Vishnu Chakravarti explains. How can the jiva be bewildered by Maya? How can the jiva whose awareness cannot be destroyed by place, time, associated ignorance? How does the jiva lose knowledge in the association ignorance? The jiva becomes affected by place. Well, we'll not read that. The part is okay. It raises a contradiction here. We'll come to Srila Prabhupada part. Because some of these things will become tricky here now. So how this all happened? So Prabhupada says in the middle of the purport, so Prabhupada established in the some of these purports are going to be very important. We're just going to literally read line by line. So the very first point Prabhupada makes in the purport is about the consciousness is always present and it never changes in any circumstances. That's the first point. Second thing Prabhupada says, when a living man moves from one place to another, he's conscious that he has changed his position, which means he remembers he's always present in the past, present, and future like electricity. And one can remember incidents from his past like that. He never forgets his personal identity, even if he's put in an awkward situation. Now, we don't remember anything of a past, but the person does not forget anything like that. So a question arises. This is where we want to read. Please read out this highlighted portion. So question arises, how can then the living entity, please read out.
How then can the living entities become forgetful of his real identity as pure spirit soul and identify with matters unless influenced by something beyond himself?
So point is, it is not possible. For example, there was a French scientist by the name of Descartes. And back in 1728, he coined a problem statement, the mind and body interaction. How does the mind and body interact? According to the modern science, you can say it that way. They consider mind to be spiritual. What is spiritual for them is which is beyond the sense perception, becomes spiritual. So how does the mind and body interact? And it is still a problem statement in the scientific world. Now, in recent, this was back in 2012 or 2013, they at least came to this understanding that they consider mind to be the cause of consciousness. That's what they're understanding. So at least they have come to this understanding. The mind is present not here. The mind is present all over the body. And that's a fact actually, according to Vedic understanding also. Mind is not here. That we'll see here also. Of course, this is not the discussion here, but the point is, what is that something beyond himself, which has tied him with the matter, is nothing but the modes of material nature, which is Maya Shakti. And what is that Maya Shakti which has created the subtle body? It is a subtle body which makes the soul identify with this world. And what is the subtle body contains of? The mind, intelligence, false ego. Because of this subtle body, we think we are this, and we have forgotten our past. That is what we'll see ahead. So the mind is the cause of all lamentation and happiness. That is the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita also. Everything happens in your mind, whatever you experience. So the point I'm raising here for all of you, if you smash on your thighs, or let's say smash on your hand, the experience of pain cannot be of the body. The body cannot experience anything. It's a dead matter. So who experiences? The mind, which means the mind is along with the consciousness present all over the body. This is now the scientists understand. And if you read Bhagavad Gita carefully, this is Bhagavad Gita's version also. So scientists have come this far where they understand the mind is present all over the body. And then there is a further study on paralysis. What happened when there is a paralysis and all that? I don't want to go into all those details right now. But what happens in paralysis, just to give you a little clue, when there is a paralysis, then there is no consciousness as we say, right? When the Vedic student will say there's no consciousness, the super soul for that reason, Upadrashta, Anumanta, Bharta, Bhokta, Maha Ishvara, the 13th chapter, when Krishna says, he's the one, and we read here also, the heart is the place from where all the energy comes. And who gives the energy? The super soul. And 13th chapter talks about that, the verse that I quoted just now. So we understand from the Vedic perspective, it is the super soul which has withdrawn the energy from that area. That is why it's called paralysis, because you still have your, let's say, leg has got paralyzed. You still have your physical element, but yet it doesn't function. And it proves something beyond that. Now, only thing is, a scientist would have that much ability to look into it, they'll understand. Thus, the actions that we perform through our senses is not performed through our senses. Is performed by the subtle senses of this gross senses. There is a subtle eye. There's also a subtle hands like that. And the thing with that is, just like, for example, let me give an example, just to give an example. If I blindfold myself, can I not see? Can I not see? Yes or no? How many say if I blindfold myself, I cannot see? Raise your hands. Okay. How many say yes? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3 hands, 4, 5 hands. Oh, everyone is raising hands. Okay, then I'll not come to the maybe. Yes, you see how? Through the sense movements, through the hands. Like the blind people can also type in. How they type in? They have those keyboards with which they can, with the sense perception, with the fingers, they understand. So now the same eye is a function of eye is happening through hand. So that third canto will talk about that, there are subtle senses also available like that. Anyways, so what is being something beyond himself, which is discussed here, is material energy. And the gift of that material energy is called as subtle body. And that subtle body is the cause of your happiness and lamentation. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita focuses so much on training of the mind. Is that making a full circle for you? Therefore, the whole thing that has to be fixed is of training the mind. Because of a consciousness, if soul is the root of consciousness, R-O-O-T, then mind is the root of consciousness, R-O-U-T-E. Our desires gets manifested in this external world through the mind. So what needs to be trained up is, of course, when you read the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, of course, the senses need to be purified, the mind needs to be purified, intelligence needs to be purified. I'm just discussing at one level how to look at it. So what is being discussed here is, what is that something beyond himself? We'll see in the few upcoming verses now. Okay, read the next line. Who was reading the conclusion?
The conclusion is that the living entities is influenced by the avidya potency, as confirmed in both the Vishnu Puran and the beginning of Srimad Bhagavatam. The living entities is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavad Gita 7.5.
So this is the point that I said. The potent can exhibit many potencies, but the potency cannot equal the potent at any stage, like that Prabhupada mentions. One potency, and then Prabhupada says, may overcome another potency, but not the potent. The living entity, please read the last few lines.
The living entities cannot be forgetful of his real identity unless influenced by the vidya potency, because the living entity is prone to the influence of the vidya potency. He can never equal the supreme potent.
So he gets bewildered by the avidya potency of the Lord, like that's been mentioned. Now, the 6th verse, The soul is part and parcel. Mama Vamsa Jiva Loka Jiva Bhuta Sanatana. Then why the soul, who is part and parcel of the Lord, and the Lord is all auspicious, why the soul has to suffer? Why it goes through the miseries? Bhagavan Eka Evesha Sarva Kshetreshu Vastita. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead is situated with all the living entities. Amushya Durbhagatvam Amushya Durbhagatvam Va Klesho Va Karma Bhi Kutaha. When the Lord is situated along with the living entities everywhere, Durbhaga, Klesha, then why does Kutaha? The reason question is why the living entities has to suffer? Why they have to go through miseries? Why do bad things happen to good people? But the answer would be given in the style of Bhagavatam, not style of Bhagavad Gita. So in a different way, the answer will be presented a little bit. The more deeper analysis like that. Let's read the translation. Well, translation I've already explained. Let's read Vishnu Chakrithakur's purport to it.
The Lord is not like an irresponsible king who assigns incapable.
Very interesting thing he makes. Please do not think Lord is like an irresponsible king who established some irresponsible, he delegated his service to some irresponsible people, and because of those irresponsible leaders, the citizens of the state are suffering. No, the Lord is himself present as Paramatma. That's the reason this question becomes far much more important. The Lord is himself present as Paramatma, yet living entity is suffering. Hey, what is the reason for it? Like that, Vishnu Chakritha. Please read out.
The Lord is not like an irresponsible king who assigns incapable rulers to his states, causing the innocent jivas to suffer. The Lord is situated in all jivas as the Paramatma personally. He is not like a king who rules by his representative in his kingdom. He alone does this. This statement excludes the possibility of dividing the responsibilities among others. Though the Lord, protector of all beings, resides in all jivas, why does the jiva have misfortune or destruction of bliss, durbhagatvam, and suffering from ignorance, karma bihi?
So Prabhupada gives 3-4 reasons for it in the purport. In fact, it is not an answer Prabhupada is giving. Prabhupada is explaining the questions by giving different perspectives here. The very first thing Prabhupada says, the body is considered a fruitful tree, and living entity in the Lord are like two birds seated on the tree. So the individual soul is, of course, this is the point which we know of, that is what is mentioned here. And then Prabhupada gives another example. A citizen of the state may be in miseries for want of sufficient supervision. However, how is it possible when the chief of the state is personally present? How can somebody still be under distress? And then Prabhupada says, from another point of view, it is understood that Jiva, living entity, is qualitatively one with the Lord. Thus, his knowledge in the pure state of life cannot be covered by ignorance. At least it should not happen in the presence of the Lord. When the Lord is personally present, it should not happen like that, Prabhupada says. Then how does a living entity become subjected to ignorance is the question. And the next, Lord is the father and protector of every living entity. He's said to be Bhuta Bhrat. Then why then should the living entity be subjected to so many sufferings and misfortunes? It should not be so. But actually we see that it happens everywhere. Like this question is therefore put forward by Vidura for solution. Tricky question. भगवान के होते हुए भी सब कुछ हो रहा है, गलत बात है. Now, text number 7 is almost similar like Karpanya Dosha, not Karpanya Dosha, but Shishya se ham sadhiman tvam prapannam. I surrender. I don't know the answers for this. Please. Etasmin me mano vidvan khidyate jnana sankate tanna paranudavi bhum kashmalam manasam maha. My mind is greatly disturbed because of ajnana sankate, this ignorance, sankate in distress because of ignorance. Tanha paranudo vibhu, O great one, vidwan, O learned one. Paranuda means please clear these doubts that my mind has got perturbed with. Kashmalam manasam mahat, please destroy this illusion relating to mind. O Mahat means oh great. So the like three ways he addresses Maitreya Muni. Vidwan, the learned one. Vibhu, or great one. Mahat, again the same thing, great. Translation.
Oh great and learned one, my mind is greatly
Greatly.
illusioned by the distress of this nescience, and I therefore request you to clear it up.
And now Maitreya Muni would speak. So before Maitreya Muni speaks, Shukdev Goswami tells about the reaction of Maitreya Muni upon hearing the questions. Shri Shukavacha Saitam Chodita Shatra Hare Krishna. जीव जागो, जोश में आओ, थोड़ा बोलोगे तो थोड़ा बहुत सा जो भी वो लेजीनेस है चला जाएगा. हाँ, सायतम चोदिता शत्रा तत्व जिज्ञासुना मुनिः प्रत्याह भगवच्चित्तः सम्यन इवा गता समयः. So Chodita is a word which is being described when Maitreya Muni heard this inquiries, he became agitated. Vishwanath Chakravarti writes, he found it difficult. Oh, what kind of difficult inquiries have been made by Vidurji? Tattva Jigyasunaha Munihi. Tattva Jigyasa one, Jigyasuna refers to Vidura, who was very eager to inquire about the truth. Pratyaha Bhagavat Chittaha. But Maitreya Muni's Chitta, Bhagavad Chitta means was absorbed in transcendence on the absolute truth. Samyaniva Gatha Samyaha. And very soon, without hesitation, he began to give answer. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, he prayed to the Lord, my dear Lord, please kindly guide how I should answer this, like that. Please read. We can have some online devotees read now. This is the purport of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the highlighted portion. Any online devotee would like to read? Please read.
Thinking of how to resolve these questions, Maitreya remembered the Lord, Bhagavad Chitta. Then he got the answer. Externally acting surprised, he seemed to say, oh, these are difficult doubts to resolve. However, he had actually resolved the doubts.
So Prabhupada says Maitreya Muni was he was filled with God consciousness. He had no reason to be astonished at such contradictory questions by Vidura. Although as a devotee, he was externally he expressed his surprise as if he did not know how to reply to those questions, but he immediately became perfect. We discussed that. Now, this is an important line here. Please read out, Prabhu.
Anyone who is a devotee of the Lord knows about the Lord to some extent, and devotional service to the Lord makes him able to know everything by the grace of the Lord. Although a devotee may apparently express himself to be ignorant, he is full of knowledge in every intricate matter.
Hari Bol. My Veda base crashed. Goranga. All the highlights disappeared. Let's see. Wait a second. Huh? I'll just open it again. We are in 3rd canto, 7th chapter, verse number 9. Hopefully, old highlights should be there. Fine. This is what we were discussing, right? No, the 8th verse we're talking. Okay. So you finished that reading, right? Is full of knowledge in every intricate matter like that. Fine. Now, Maitreya Muni begins to answer. So the verse number 9, he answers regarding the Lord, the question which were raised by Vidurji about the Lord in the 9th verse. And a very interesting answer he gives. The answer Prabhupada already gave in the purport. We read that. But let's see what Maitreya Muni says. Maitreya Vacha Seyam Bhagavato Maya Yannayena Virudyate Ishwarasya Vimuktasya Karpanyam Utabandhanam. This is such an illogical inquiry. Now, I mean, this is not the way he mentioned it to Vidurji, but this is how is explained to all those who doubt Krishna's eternal nature. It's illogical, it's against all logic. So let's see what he speaks about it. Why? No, some things are there. Okay, fine, no problem. Those who are online devotees, they can read. Please read out what Prabhupada writes. Hare Krishna.
Sri Maitreya said, certain conditioned souls put forward the theory that Supreme Brahman or the personality of Godhead is overcome by illusion or Maya, and at the same time they maintain that he is unconditional. This is against all logic.
Does not make any logic to understand. The Lord is, gets conditioned. This is what. So this is indicating more to Mayavadis. And now comes a very interesting purport. I'll focus largely on Prabhupada's purport here. Okay, so very first thing Prabhupada makes a point here about, it appears the Lord, who is 100% spiritual, cannot be the cause of the illusory potency which covers the knowledge of the individual soul. But factually, there is no doubt that illusory external energy is also part and parcel of the Lord. Why? What is the evidence? We find this evidence in Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 7th chapter, when Vyasadeva, in his mature state of realization, had darshan of the Lord. Whom did he see along with the Lord? He also saw the Maya. So where was the Maya standing? Behind the Lord, like a servant to the master. So that's what Prabhupada mentions here, that it is actually the Lord's energy like that. Then the living entities, the another point we'll read from here, where the concept of Daridra Narayan is mentioned. Please read out from this portion. Any devotee online can read it now.
The energy and the energetic personality of Godhead are not different, and although such energy is one with the Lord, he is never overpowered by it. Although the living entities are also parts and parcels of the Lord, they are overcome by the material energy. The inconceivable yogam, Aishwaryam of the Lord, as mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita 9.5, is misunderstood by the froggish philosophers. In order to support a theory that Narayan, the Lord himself,
we'll just pause here 1 second. So how do they misconstrue this whole idea? How do they misrepresent this whole eternal nature or spiritual nature of the Lord? And what they have come up with the concept of what Prabhu was about to read. In order to support a theory that Lord becomes a Daridra Narayan, a poor man, they oppose the material energy. They propose the material energy overcomes the Supreme Lord. So what is Mayavad all about? According to Mayavad, when mode of goodness interacts with Brahman, then Lord, the form of the Lord is created. When mode of passion interacts with Brahman, then the living entities are created. And when mode of ignorance interacts with Brahman, then matter is created. Now, this itself is flawed according to their understanding, if you want to refute. Because in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, see, they also accept Bhagavad Gita minus Krishna. But they accept Bhagavad Gita. What does the Sankhya Yoga says in second chapter? The soul is indivisible. The soul cannot be divided. What is soul? Soul is Brahman. So how can Brahman get divided into Lord, Jiva, and matter? Is self-contradictory? Now, just to prove their point, that how Lord gets covered over by material energy, and how you and I are all Lord, Prabhupada says, in order to support a theory, they came up with the concept of Daridra Narayana. What is a Daridra Narayan? A poor Narayan. Which, in other words, they are saying everyone is Narayana. And because of the influence of material energy, they have forgotten. So according to Mayavadis, they are performing Leela. Their Leela in Avidya is what their Leela is going on right now. Just like His Holiness Jayapataka Swami Maharaj, this is post Srila Prabhupada's departure. No, this is Srila Prabhupada only. Srila Prabhupada had sent him to go to Jagannath Puri and meet with the head of the Shankaracharya Mutt there and talk to him why they are not allowing our disciples to go and, enter the Jagannath Puri temple. So Prabhupada had written a letter, and His Honor Jayapataka Maharaj went to Jagannath Puri, and he went and met with the head of those Shankaracharya Mutt there. So when he went and met there, so he kind of offered the letter, and we began to speak to him. So the head of the Matha, the head of the Shankaracharya Mutt asked him, so what is your concern? What has happened? What has troubled you? So Maharaj said, well, these pandas or these pandits are not allowing, and Srila Prabhupada is unhappy. Srila Prabhupada is even, he will not come to Jagannath Puri if his disciples are not invited. They are Vaishnavas. Why are we discriminating on the bodily, sense? So that head asked, so this trouble is for what? So Maharaj said, because we want to, why do you want to enter the temple? Maharaj said, we want to enter the temple to see Jagannath. He said, what's your problem? I'm standing in front of you. Maharaj speaks about it. He said, Arey, what's your problem? I'm standing in front of you. I'm Jagannath, I'm like this. So sometimes happens when suddenly somebody would say something, just like Maitreya Muni was astonished at the inquiry of that Uddhava. Here Maharaj was surprised with the response of the sadhu. I remember a couple of months, just not couple of, even a few weeks ago, I have this Saturday, Sunday programs in different places. So I'm having this community program on Sunday morning at one place. So after the whole program ended, there were some guests who wanted to meet. So I was standing and talking to them. And there was one girl, almost like, you can say 20, 21-year-old, something like that, a college going girl. She was constantly looking and smiling at me. So when somebody looks at you, smiles at you, constantly looks like maybe you know each other. I didn't know, so I thought maybe she might have seen some online programs or something. So after a good half an hour and all that, I was meeting the guests when they all parted away for prasadam. Then this lady came forward. So the way she was looking at it, I thought she was pretty confident that we know each other. So I said, Hare Krishna, who are you and all that? And she introduced herself briefly. Long story short, then I said, you want to meet? You have some question to ask? She said, yes, I have one question to ask. I said, yes, what's your question? I have never been stumped like this in my life as I was stumped by her when she asked a question. For a second, it was like I got an electric shock. Oh, what kind of question is this? And with a smiling face, she said, don't you get bored speaking on the same subject matter again and again? She and I are meeting for the first time. She has not apparently heard me online also. So maybe that's something that she might have attended the same topic before. So I thought maybe, so I clarified with her, have you heard me before? No, I'm meeting you for the first time. I was like, meeting me first time, and yet she's asking me, don't you get bored speaking on the same subject again and again? And it took me a while what to say. Now, what do I say about it? So people ask sometimes tricky question. Anyways, come back to the subject matter here. So Daridra Narayan. Now, what is this whole history of Daridra Narayan concept? This has not been there historically. The Mayavad has been there historically. But Daridra Narayan is a very recent. It's a gift of, not a gift of, in one sense, it's a gift of Britishers action, wherein our reaction was the concept of Daridra Narayan. Mayavad has been there. You don't read about Daridra Narayan anywhere in the shlokas, you read about Mayavadis. So how did Daridra Narayan came? It came, this whole concept was introduced when the Christian missionaries started converting people. How they started converting people? They said, oh, these poor people, Jesus loves them. And, they started like Mother Teresa, all that missions they started. And under the guise of those missions, the whole objective was to convert people. So when the Hindu society, which largely governed by Shankaracharya's followers, Mayavadi forum, when they saw how our people are being converted, then they started their missions, charitable organizations to help the poor people so that the conversions don't happen. And that is the time they created this terminology, Daridra Narayan. Daridra Narayan means Narayan has become poor. So serve the poor, which means you serve the Narayan. You believe in Mayavad or don't believe in Mayavad, either way. So you serve the poor, you serve Narayan, That's how the Daridanaran concept came into existence. So this is what Prabhupada is briefly speaking about it here. And then Prabhupada quotes Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. They give a very nice example which Prabhupada quotes. I guess somebody online was reading. Prabhu, please go ahead, read out.
They say that although the sun is all light, the clouds, the darkness, and snowfall are all part and parcel of the sun. Without the sun, there is no possibility of the skies being overcast with the clouds or darkness, nor can there be snowfall on the earth. Although life is sustained by the sun, life is also disturbed by darkness and snowfall produced by the sun. But it is also a fact that the sun itself is never overcome by darkness, clouds, or snowfall. The sun is far, far away from such disturbances. Only those who have a poor fund of knowledge say that the sun is covered by a cloud or by darkness. Similarly, the Supreme Brahman or the Parabrahman, the personality of God, it is always unaffected by the influence of the material energy, although it is one of his energies. Parasya Shakti Vedaishi.
So this is the second evidence in the purport. The first evidence was the Maya is Shakti of the Lord, and Prabhupada gave an example of Vyasdev seeing that. Second example is this: the sun is, although the sun is a cause for these clouds, but sun is never covered by the cloud. And third, there is no reason to assert that Supreme Brahman is overpowered by illusory energy. Very beautiful. Prabhupada extends this analogy. A very beautiful analogy. Prabhupada continues with this. Prabhupada says, yes, the clouds, darkness, or snowfall can cover only a very insignificant portion of the sun. No, not of the sun, of the sun rays. So who gets covered over? So no. I mean, of course, sun rays. I mean, who gets covered over? Living entities get covered over, not the sun. Similarly, the modes of material nature may react upon the ray-like living entities. It is a misfortune of the living entities, certainly not without reason, that the influence of the material energy acts on his pure consciousness and eternal bliss. This covering up of pure consciousness and eternal bliss is due to avidya karma smagnya, the energy which acts on the infinitesimal living entity, like that. Prabhupada makes a point. And Prabhupada quotes Vishnu Puran others to talk about the relationship between the Lord and the Jiva. The Jivas are like sun rays, where the Lord is a sun, the Lord is like a fire, and the Jivas are like the sparks in the fire. Like that, 2 points Prabhupada makes. And finally, Prabhupada concludes the clear conclusion. From here, we can read up to the end. Please read out, Prabhu.
The clear conclusion is that the Supreme Lord, who is the original fire, is never overpowered, but the infinitesimal sparks of the fire can become overpowered by the illusory effect of Maya. It is a most ludicrous argument to say that the Supreme Lord is overpowered by his own material energy. The Lord is the master of the material energy, but the living entities are in the conditioned state, controlled by the material energy. That is the version of the Bhagavad Gita. The froggish philosophers who put forward the argument that the Supreme Lord is overpowered by the material mode of goodness are themselves illusioned by the same material energy, although they think of themselves as liberated souls. They support their arguments by a false and laborious jugglery of words, which is a gift of the same illusory energy of the Lord. But the poor froggish philosophers, due to false sense of knowledge, cannot understand the situation.
And then Prabhupada quotes the 6th canto, 9th chapter, where the Devata speaks. Please read out this. What does the Devata say?
Thus, the demigods prayed to the Supreme Lord that although his activities are very difficult to understand, they can still be understood to some extent by those who sincerely engage in the transcendental living service of the Lord. The demigods admitted that although the Lord is apart from the material influence of creation, he nevertheless creates, maintains, and annihilates the complete cosmic manifestation by the agency of the demigods.
Yeah, so like that, Maitri Muni answers about this is illogical. And why it's illogical? Prabhupada gives at least 4 evidences in the purport why it is illogical or against all logic. Now, in verses 10 and 11, the question raised by Vidurji about Jivatma becoming victimized by ignorance and Jivatma suffering is being addressed in the 10th and 11th verse. 10th verse, Yadarthena vinamyusya Pumsa atma viparyaha Pratiyata upadrashto Swashiraschetdanadikaha. So answer is this. The problem with the living entity is Atma Vipyaha, which means misidentification. Misidentification with what? Misidentification happens because of what? The subtle body, which is false ego. And with as a result of it, misidentifies with what? With matter, and starts thinking matter to be I. The whole problem starts when the living entity identifies itself with the matter. A very beautiful analogy and example is given. Just like on a moonlit night, you get to see the reflection of the moon in the river. If there is a disturbance in the water, we will see the reflection of the moon trembling, right? The ignorant person who does not know the moon exists in the sky, but who only sees this, would say what? The moon is traveling, which means the reflection here is compared to the living entities, which means the living entity is suffering. And the trembling is caused by what? Is caused in the river. The reflection is happening in the river. The river is compared to the Maya. Therefore, under the influence of Maya, the living entity is trembling. No, living entity is not trembling. What is trembling? The subtle body. But because the person does not know, the moon doesn't exist here, the moon exists there. He misidentifies the reflection. Therefore, he concludes, oh, Mama, dekho, Chandrama hil raha hai. No, Chandrama nahi hil raha hai. It's the reflection of the moon. And like that, this beautiful analogy goes on. Another example, Vishnu Chakri Thakur gives, just like gold and diamond, for that reason, are a shining metal. However, when that gold and diamond is kept within a dark room, they lose their luster. Yes? Now, because they have temporarily lost their luster, it doesn't mean they have got covered over or they have lost their identity. Here, Vishnu Chakri Thakur says, however, when you bring a ruby can dissipate darkness also. So here the diamond and the gold is compared to a living entity and ruby is compared to a devotee. When conditioned living entity who is Satchidananda, but under the influence of Maya Shakti, which means the ignorance, has temporarily forgotten his nature of Satchitananda, can get revived under the association of devotee who acts like a ruby in his life by dissipating the darkness. Like that, many, many examples are given. That's how. So it's all because of misidentification. So let's read out. Let's read Vishnu Chakri Thakur's translation. Devotees online, they can continue. Those who have not yet spoken, any one of you, please go ahead.
Because of Maya, the Jivas, the living entity is in distress regarding his.
Vishnu Chakri Thakur's translation, Prabhu.
Because of Maya, the Jiva's loss of knowledge and bliss makes it its appearance without cause or purpose. The loss of illusory just
The loss is illusory.
the loss is illusory, just the seer of a dream experiencing his head being cut off is illusory.
So here in this particular shloka is mentioned, Swashiras Chedanadikaha, just like somebody losing his own head. And Prabhupada gives an example saying that sometimes when the child becomes, a student becomes very naughty, the teacher may threaten the child, If you don't stop your naughtiness, I'll cut your head and hang it for you to see it for yourself. And अरे जब सिरी कट गया तो देखेगा कहाँ से? And those who says, oh yes, I can see my head hanging there, they're called as Mayavadis, who are hallucinating. That's the point. Okay, we will take a look at it. Please read out the highlighted portion, Prabhu.
Because of Maya, the loss of knowledge and bliss, Atma Viparyaya, of the Jiva, Pumsa, appears to be without cause or goal, Arthena. An example is given. The seer of a dream, Drashtahu, near himself, Upa, sees his head is cut off. Though his head is intact, in the dream state, he experiences that his head is gone. Though the jiva does not actually have a destruction of knowledge and bliss, in a state of ignorance, he perceives this destruction. The brilliant luster of gold and silver is not lost by darkness, but is only covered. Just as a very brilliant ruby destroys even darkness, the life of the devotee destroys even ignorance.
We were just quoting this analogy to all of you. Yeah, this is the point. And then Vishnu Thakur writes further. Okay, there's a second. Yeah.
If we give this analogy, it appears like then everything is dream. Like just like in the dream, we are seeing the head is cut, but actually it's not cut. When we speak this analogy, like I was speaking in one class with analogy. So then he says, Prabhuji, our Vaishnava philosophy is that everything is not Maya, but everything is temporary. But Mayavadi say that Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. And when we say this analogy that the head is cut in the dream, but actually it's not cut. And we are seeing. So this shows that we are thinking that this world is actually illusion. You are just in a dreamy state. You are thinking you are suffering, but actually you're not suffering. So how to then, because it's quoted by our acharyas, and our philosophy is that the world is real, it's temporary. And Mayavadi says it's not real also, it's Maya. But the analogy supports more their conception than ours. So how to understand
first thing, therefore, analogies have to be very carefully used, because at times analogy can be misconstrued if you overthink on that analogy, you know. So how it is not false, Srila Prabhupada explains. This is based on a lecture that Prabhupada gave on Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, wherein he was making this beautiful example, analogy. This is again on the subject matter of, this is on the 12th verse, Natu evaham jatu, natum neme janadipaha. This verse destroys Mayavad philosophy. There in that verse, Prabhupada, while giving a lecture, was making an example. He said, you know, the Lord can be compared, not the Lord like that. The Lord can be, for example, Brahman can be compared, or Lord can be compared to the rain cloud. And the living entities can be compared to the rains. Now, when the rains happen in this world, it do create some byproducts. Vegetation is there. Similarly, when a living entity is present in this world, it does do activities. It does create certain activities and certain byproducts. They are not false, but they are temporary. That is how Srila Prabhupada explains. So it's not false, it's temporary. And the example of, you know, it's a dreaming state, had been cut off and all that, it is explained in the context only of suffering. Your sufferings actually don't exist. This is like, and why it doesn't exist? Because it's all the game of mind. In general also, an ordinary person, 99.99 problems that he thinks exist are not existing, are imagined. Even he would understand that. If you happen to ask a person, tell him 6 months before than now, the problems that you were worried of and problems that you're worried of now, is it too much different or is it same? If you look into it, the problems more or less are still the same. Ahar, nidra, bhai, maitunam. Only thing, the forms have changed. And the person continues on. Even today, he is worried. Even if he becomes 50-year-old man, even he is the richest person on this world, he's still worried. because the mind has got into the nature of creating problems. But the problems don't exist. That is how it's explained. And therefore, in Bhagavad Gita, when Arjuna has to address his problem, or when Sanjay has to address, like first chapter 47, or the last verse of that first chapter, Sanjay says that Arjuna's mind became grief stricken. When Sanjay describes Arjuna's problem, Sanjay never said that Arjuna was in problem. Arjuna said Arjuna's mind became perturbed and grief stricken. Therefore, he sat down on the chariot. Similarly, if you remember the 11th chapter, when Arjuna explains his condition to Krishna while looking at that whole ferocious universal form, and he pleaded the Lord, my dear Lord, please stop this, horror show which is going on right now. That time also he said, my dear Lord, my mind has become perturbed and disturbed. So when it comes to talking about sufferings, pains, and pleasure, in that context it is explained, it is not existing in the sense as a dreamy state means. I mean, of course, when you make that point of dreamy state, it looks like it is non-existing at all. But here it is, as mentioned, in the eternity of the life that we have, it just doesn't make any sense. And even the pains and pleasures that we had before, now it don't exist. Even let's say yesterday you had a nice gulab jamun, you don't remember the pleasure of today. And that's how it is explained in dreamy state. It's just the mind and the nature, and the thing with the mind is always changing. So whatever goes with your mind does not remain consistently. So like that, this subject, you cannot use this example to explain anything else except for the suffering, the pains and pleasure. That is only considered. And another point is, yes, Krishna says is temporary, matas pashasu konteya, like that. It's close to that. So that's how it has been explained. But if you use this analogy for anything else except for pains and pleasure, then only Krishna save you. How do you defend yourself? Your analogy, I don't know at that point of time. Okay, so we were reading the ninth shloka, and now ahead, we're reading this point. There is no reason. We were reading Prabhupada purport, right? We were on 10th shloka, sorry, not the ninth. So here, Prabhupada mentions this point. This is a point. Please read out. Prabhupada says, hallucination of Mayavadis. Yes.
Similarly, the miseries of the pure soul and the destruction of his self-identification are menaced by the external energy of the Lord, which controls those mischievous living entities who want to go against the will of the Lord. Actually, there is no bondage or misery for the living entity, nor does he ever lose his pure knowledge. In his pure consciousness, when he thinks a little seriously
All
about...
right. Sorry, this is not the point. We'll read, Prabhu continue reading, but it's over here where Prabhupada speaks about the Mayavadis. Yeah, please read here, this one.
The experience is compared to the experience of one's having his head cut off in a dream. The man whose head has been cut off also sees that his head has been cut off. If a person's head is severed, he loses his power to see. Therefore, if a man sees that his head has been cut off, it means that he thinks like that in hallucination. Similarly, a living entity is eternally subordinate to the Supreme Lord, and he has his knowledge with him, but artificially thinks that he is God himself, and that although he is God, he has lost his knowledge due to Maya.
That's the point. So hallucination. So this is Mayavadis are just hallucinating, thinking that they are God. And Prabhupada makes the last point in relation to the service. And Prabhupada says, even in this conditioned life, he is eternal servant of the Lord. However, his service attitude is under the spell of Maya, which is also a manifestation of his eternal condition of service. Because he has rebelled against the service, therefore he is put into the service of Maya. But he's still serving, but in a perverted manner. And then he says how you get out of this state. So that way, this is what our eternal nature is. And to think that we are the God is hallucination. It's like seeing your head cut off hanging somewhere like that. Now comes the 11th, another analogy given, very beautiful analogy given by our Maitri Muni. He describes in relationship to the lamentation, why do bad things happen to good people? Like why the living entities suffer? Now that question is answered here. यथा जले चंद्रमशः कंपादिस्तत्कृतो गुणः दृश्यते असन्नपि द्रष्टुर् आत्मनो गुणः. Krishna Chakra's translation. I've already explained this analogy, so let's read out.
The qualities belonging to the subtle body do not belong to the Atma, but appear to be so. Just as the trembling quality in the water imposed on the reflection of the moon is not trembling of the moon, though it appears to be so.
So that trembling is not of the living entity. The soul is not experiencing happiness and distress, but it is of the subtle body because of which it appears the living entity is suffering and happening, just like in a river where the water is moving. However, if the water is still, there is no trembling. When the subtle body gets purified, when the living entity becomes dhira, then there is no trembling, which means sukhe dukhe samay kritva labha labho jaya jayo. Then he does not get affected by happiness and distress. This is the point in this context. Now, I mean, this analogy, whole purpose is nothing, but Prabhupada expands this analogy to 5 gradations. एंड पूरा का पूरा इतिहास इसी परपट में लिख देते हैं इस एनालॉजी के माध्यम से. तो कभी आप इस एनालॉजी को उपयोग करें तो इस परपट को याद करके उपयोग करिएगा, वरना कंक्लूजन बहुत खतरनाक निकलेगा. Let's read it and I can tell you what could be the converse conclusion if in case we make a little mistake. Okay, let's take a look at analogy again. There is a moon, there is this river, the moonlit night, and the reflection is there. And reflection is of the moon. The one immediate understanding is, yes, that means we are that. You got point? We are the moon. That is Mayavadi conclusion. The same analogy can be used by them. So therefore, the careful study of analogy is needed. So what it is said, no, you're not the moon. Moon is Krishna. You are the moon rays. You are the moon rays. And how that reflection is created is because of the moon rays only, na? Reflection is because of the light, moonlit, and that is from the rays. Like that, there's a slight difference in that. So question is, the knowledge and bliss of Jiva may be covered. Obtains qualities as attachment, hatred, lamentation, illusion, and lust. This is nothing but the good friends of the mind. Okay, please read out the highlighted portion from Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur's purport.
The trembling imposed on the moon's image in the water appears to be trembling of the moon, though actually the moon is not trembling but the water. The moon seen in the water is not the moon, but the moon's rays of light only.
Actually, you know what? We can read Prabhupada's purport directly because Prabhupada's whole purport is more elaborate on this. We'll go by Prabhupada's purport. Please read out fully. And I'll interject you in between to just tell you now the analogy is changing so that you don't get confused with the analogy here. Please go ahead, read Prabhupada's purport.
The Supreme Soul, the personality of Godhead, is compared to the moon in the sky, and the living entities are compared to the reflection of the moon on water. The moon in the sky is fixed and does not appear to quiver like the moon on the water, actually like the original moon in the sky. The moon reflected on the water should also not quiver, but because of being associated with water, the reflection appears to be quivering. Although in actual fact, the moon is fixed. The water moves, but the moon does not move. Similarly, the living entities appear to be tainted by material qualities like illusion, lamentation, and miseries. Although in the pure soul, such qualities are completely absent. The word pratiyate, which means apparently, are not actually like the experiencing of having one's head cut off in a dream, is significant here.
So that's the first part of analogy. It's all happening because of the subtle body. The moon is not changing. The reflection is not changing. Whatever the perception of our trembling of reflection, of not the reflection of the moon, is because of the impurities injected by the material energy, and that is through subtle body. Now, second part, the reflection.
The reflection of the moon on the water is the separated rays of the moon and not the actual moon. The separated parts and parcel of the Lord, entangled in the water of material existence, have the quivering quality, whereas the Lord is like the actual moon in skin.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at my book. Go ahead.
Actual moon in the sky, which is not at all in touch with water.
Okay, this is the end of second part of analogy, which means who gets this experience of lamentation if there is for, that's only for living entities. The Lord does not undergo any of these experiences. The Lord is always situated in transcendence. It is the sun rays when they are mixed with the quality of water, then the trembling happens. So we jivas undergo pain and pleasure. So when Ram, Mother Sita was kidnapped, and when Lord Ram was crying and howling literally and wandering in the forest, and then Shivji and Parvati saw Lord Ram. Shivji went behind the tree and offered obeisances, and Mother Parvati was surprised. And she said, "Hey, you, the Supreme Lord of this creation, offering respects to Jiva?" And Shivji said, "No, this is not Jiva. This is my worshipful Lord." Parvati said, "No, how can he be worshipful Lord?" Parvati, Maya, got bewildered, seeing Lord Ram crying. And he was wandering around the forest, Lakshman, Sita, Sita, Sita. And that time Shivji said, "Parvati, this is not a Jiva, this is Lord Ram." And then Parvati asked, "So why are you not going in front of your Lord Ram?" Shivji said, "If I go, Lord Ram has appeared to fulfill our purpose of killing Ravana. And this is a forest. And Ravana's agents are everywhere. If Ravana's agent saw Shiva offering respect to somebody, then everyone will understand that that Supreme Personality of Godhead have appeared. And then it may happen that Ravana may release Sita out of fear that this person is Vishnu and will kill me. Therefore, I'm offering respect from behind the tree." Still, Parvati was not convinced. "No, let me test Ram." And Parvati went. She went in front of Lord Ram as Sita. And you know probably the whole story. Lord Ram, without even looking at the face, looking at the feet, said, "Hey Parvati, hey Mata Parvati, जंगल में अकेले भटक रहे हो? हमारे प्रभु शिवजी कहाँ हैं?" And Parvati was shocked. And she was, now imagine if Maya has to trick you. And she was in the form of Sita, and suddenly she changed her form without saying anything to Ram. She came back running. And she saw Lord Shiva sitting in Samadhi. And she was so embarrassed. What do I say to Lord Shiva? And that time Lord Shiva said, "Didn't I tell you? Don't do this." And this story continues in the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. This is the reason why Sati had to be sacrificed. This was the background story that happened in the 4th canto. This is not in Bhagavatam mentions. This is mentioned in other version of Ramayana. Because of this offense, what happened? This is not Parvati, this is Sati. And Parvati is later on the daughter of Himalayas, like that. And because of this, Sati had to be later on, the offense that he committed. 2 offenses, one against the Lord. She tried insulting the Lord, attempting to become Sita. But she was literally mocking at that whole thing that was happening. Second, she disobeyed Lord Shiva like that. Anyways, that's a different thing. But why did I talk about this? How does somebody understand the Lord Ram is crying? But no, scripture says Vipralamba is far much more glorious than Sambhoga. So only a spiritualist can understand the feelings of separation. So the moon does not undergo lamentation and suffering. That's the point mentioned. Go ahead. Third part of the analogy.
The light of the sun and moon reflected on matter makes the matter bright and praiseworthy. The living symptoms are compared to the light of the sun and the moon illuminating material manifestations like trees and mountains. The reflection of the sun or moon is accepted as the real sun or moon by less intelligent men.
Oh, wait a second. Third part now. So the rays compared to the living symptoms are compared to the light of the sun and moon. Now the 4th part of analogy. The reflection of the sun or moon is accepted as, go ahead.
The reflection of the sun or moon is accepted as the real sun or moon by less intelligent men, and the pure monistic philosophy develops from these ideas. In fact, the light of the sun and the moon are actually different from the sun and moon themselves, although they are always connected. The light of the moon spread throughout the sky appears to be impersonal, but the moon planet as it is personal, and the living entities on the moon planet are also personal. In the rays of the moon, different material entities appear to be comparatively more or
So
less important.
that's a point of monastery. They consider the rays and the planet to be the same. And the fifth one is the last point. You can read out at leisure. I'm just giving you some high level understanding. This the last fifth gradation of the analogy. Go ahead.
The quivering quality of the moon is also variable. When the water is standing still, there is no quivering. A more settled conditioned soul quivers less, but due to material connection, the quivering quality is more or less present everywhere.
So it's something like electric shock. Whoever tries to mess around with Mahadevi gets an electric shock and he trembles. So the more you tremble is, the bigger electric shock you're getting from the Mahadevi. And the more you're disconnected from the socket, which is Mahadevi, to that degree you are Dhira. You're sitting soberly. That's what Prabhupada says. Right? Now comes the 12th verse. Now, what is the solution? So how can the jiva can be saved from this conditioned nature? And verses 12 to 14 gives an answer. And this is the main component of this chapter. Therefore, I'm spending time because after that comes the questions asked by Vidura. So therefore, we're going a little slowly here. Text number 12. Savai nivrati dharmena vasudevanukampaya bhagavad bhakti yogena tirodhatte shaneya. Vasudeva Anukampaya, when somebody engages Bhagavad Bhakti Yogena, takes to the bhakti of the Vasudev or the Lord, then by his causeless mercy, Tirodhate means diminishes all the miseries, all the problems of his life. Shaneriha, gradually he becomes, just like Nectar Devotion says, chapter 1, Rupa Goswami talks about general symptoms of bhakti. Kleshagni. क्लेशाग्नि सुबधा मोक्ष लागतुक सुदुर्लभा क्या क्लेशाग्नि सुबधा मोक्ष लागतुक सुदुर्लभा Shri Krishna no, between that, before that, that's the last thing. Anyways, the 8 qualities, I believe 2 to 4, I think 6 qualities are mentioned, right? Kleshagni subhadha moksha lagtukrit sudurlabha Sandarananda Visheshatma Shri Krishna Akarshanichasa. So that's what is being described. Tirodhate Shaner Iha gradually diminishes to the degree we develop in our bhakti. How can the jiva be delivered is a question asked. This happens through bhakti. So Vishnu Chakravarti says this takes place gradually according to the sadhana with various degrees of anartha nivritti. That's the reason I was quoting this shloka from Nectar of Devotion. Srila Prabhupada and the purport says, only knowledge and devotional service can elevate, not otherwise. Please read out the highlighted portion.
Only knowledge and devotional service can elevate one towards the path of liberation. The development of knowledge for the purpose of knowing everything without rendering devotional service is considered fruitless labor, and one cannot get the desired result by such labor. Lord Vasudev is pleased by devotional service only, and thus his mercy is relished by association with pure devotees of the Lord.
That's the point. Only by seva, the Lord is pleased without rendering devotional service. And that is what the 13th verse glorifies. 13th verse speaks about seva destroys misery. Yadendriyo paramotha drashtratmani pareharo viliyante tada klesha samsuptasyeva kritsnashaha. Please read Vishnu Chakravarti's translation.
When the senses become fixed on the attractive Lord who is beyond material influence and who glances upon his devotees with mercy, the sufferings disappear completely, like the complete disappearance of suffering in deep sleep.
So point is, Vidurji may ask Maitri, when would this stage of anartha nivritti would be completed? Then only will be freed from the quivering. That is being answered here. When a living entity fully gets absorbed in rendering service. And that is being compared to 2 things. Prabhupada says, after a sound sleep, you forget the fatigueness of your body. Like that, Prabhupada explains. And here Vishnu Thakur says the same thing he present as if when you go into a deep slumber, you forget all your bodily misery. Even if your body is in pain, when you go into deep slumber, you don't remember anything. Like that is being discussed here. So, yeah, another meaning of this verse. What does Vishnu Thakur says? Please read.
According to Bhakti, when the senses such as eye and ear become fixed in the Lord, who is attractive with beauty and other qualities, when the eye, ear, nose, skin, tongue, and absorb in the beauty, voice, fragrance, softness of body, sweetness, and cleverness of the Lord, and no longer desire to experience material form, sound, smell, touch, taste, and thought, suffering is destroyed.
So when is anatha nivritti is completed? When a person is now completely engaged in only spiritual activity and has no desire for any material affairs. Third chapter, Bhagavad Gita. Atha kena prayuktayam papam charati purusha. Right? Arjuna says, Baladivo niyojitaha. Without knowledge, without my permission, we are forced into doing a sinful activities. Krishna says, Kamesha, Krodha Esha. And Kam is desires. Unless we become freed from all the material desires, until then, we have to continue to suffer. What does Krishna says? Kama. He describes, Krishna says in that section, senses, mind, and intelligence. Now, question comes, among these three, which is the easiest to control? The senses. The senses and mind intelligence is a very interesting concept. The physical service purifies the senses, which is very easy to be engaged into. Yes or no? You don't even require any skill set. झाड़ू उठा के लगाने में कुछ चाहिए? नहीं. What purifies mind? Chanting Hare Krishna. Cheto Darpanam Marjanam. What purifies intelligence? Knowledge. Therefore, third chapter ends with, Hey Arjuna, therefore you should cultivate transcendental knowledge. And what is the title of chapter 4? Transcendental knowledge. Where for the first time in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives a pep talk about himself in the first initial verses of the 4th chapter. So like these three things, physical service, chanting of Hare Krishna, and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam purifies our existence. Like that, these three things Prabhupada gave us. The culture that he created was of making sure that every individual gets these three opportunities. It's not that we can skip any one of it, because in the 2nd chapter of Bhagavad Gita that is mentioned, the lust not only manifests through the genitals. That is a very gross sense of it. The lust, when it is refrained or restrained, can manifest through any of the senses. Example is, let's say you have done Nirjala Ekadashi fasting, and let's say we are used to eating nicely every day. And under the association of devotees or whatnot, we have attempted to Nirjala Ekadashi. What happens the next day? Atyahara prayashascha. Yes or no? That whole refrain, we restricted ourselves. We try to control that lust. Where does the lust manifest? In the eating habit. Like that, senses, mind, intelligence, if you want to overcome lust, which means the desires, these three have to be engaged properly. That is the point here. So Prabhupada's purport is on the same line, senses and sense engagements like that. We cannot, Prabhupada gives an example. Artificially stopping a mischievous child is not the real remedy. The child must be given some better engagement so that he will automatically stop causing mischief. In the same way, the mischievous activities of the senses can be stopped only by nivartate. And the last few lines, we can read it. Please read out the last few lines.
Our activities must be transcendentally saturated that the Lord will be kind enough to look upon us favorably and engage us in his transcendental service. Then only can the senses be satisfied completely and be no longer troubled by material attraction.
And now comes the 14th verse, which is a concluding verse as an answer to Vidura's question. Text number 14. Oh, it's not visible here. Ashesha Sanklesha Shamam Vidatte Gunanuvada Shravanam Murare. Kim va punascha charanaravindha paraga sevaratratmalabdha. So Vishnu Thakur writes, these first two lines represent sadhana bhakti, and paraga seva rati, when you develop attraction towards the service of the Lord, represents bhava bhakti. Rupa Goswami describes actually as three: sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, and prema bhakti. But actually, there's sadhana or sadhya only, But he describes for other reasons like that. Ashesha sanklesha shamam vidhatte gunanuvada shravanam murare. So one gets freed. Klesha, what is that? Kleshagni subhada. That happens when a person begins Gunanuvada Shravanam Murari, when he begins to hear about the qualities of the Supreme Personality Godhead. That's at the sadhana bhakti stage happens. Kimva punastat charanaravindha paraga seva ratir. Ratir means attraction, atmalabdha. One who develops attraction or becomes attached to the lotus feet of the Lord or to the service, parag, seva, atmalabdha. That is considered atmalabdha, greatest achievement like that. Please read out Vishnu Chakrasaku's translation.
Hearing and speaking about the qualities of the Lord is sadhana bhakti, produces destruction of unlimited suffering. How much more can be attained by great attraction for serving the pollen of the lotus feet of the Lord, appearing by its self-revealing nature during the state of bhava bhakti?
The highlighted portion.
The sadhana bhakti destroys ignorance. How much more results its goal, rati or bhava will produce. The chief result of rati is not destruction of ignorance.
That's an important point. Freedom from misery is not why we are practicing bhakti. We are practicing bhakti. Here it's about prema bhakti, actually, not even bhava bhakti. The Lord comes under the control of the devotee. So Vishnu Thakur taking a step further, because that's not it happens in bhava bhakti. Shri Krishna akarshani chacha, that's at prema bhakti, where now Krishna is attracted. And when we talk about this, we talk about the devotion of Srimati Radharani, as Srila Rupa Goswami describes. The chief result of rati is not destruction from misery. The chief result of, or let's say, the chief result of our bhakti, or why we should perform bhakti, is to attract Krishna, not to get rid of sufferings. Padam padam yata vipadam natesham. That's the law of the nature. What can you do about it? That's always going to be there. So with that, we pause here for today. The answers have been done. Next, 15 to 22, Vidurji would share his realizations. And then Vidurji would ask questions, something similar like what has been asked in the 8th chapter or 7th chapter of 2nd canto. We're just going to read out the questions. We're not going to, Prabhupada also have not mentioned much into it. So that's a quick session which will get easily over. And then we have Vidura declared his confidence in Maitreya. And then we have finally appearance of Brahmaji happening from Garbhodaksha Vishnu in the 8th chapter, which is only 33rd verses. So we'll conclude this discussion tomorrow. So with that, we end here for today. Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada Ki. Hare Krishna.